Good evening. This meeting of the Palo Alto Unified School District Board of Education is now in order. The board met immediately preceding this meeting in closed session and took one reportable action. The board considered a government claim by student and the student's parents against the district regarding allegations of threatening and harassing conduct from another student as part of closed session agenda item B3. The board voted unanimously to reject the claim. The first item on our agenda for this evening is the approval of the agenda order.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
So it's moved and seconded to approve the agenda order. Student board members, preferential vote.
Aye.
Aye. Board members, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The agenda order is adopted. Next item on our agenda is the superintendent's report. Dr. Austin.
Okay, thank you. Pull this a little closer. First of all, we've received a fair amount of correspondence regarding false or at least annoying fire alarms at Palo Alto High School. I want to start by saying frustration is distributed pretty equally on this topic. I'll be meeting along with Mr. Paulson, Ms. Ofek, Ron Ellis, Dr. Novak, Jerry Bergson, and Ron Smith on Tuesday at 2 o'clock to continue to problem solve this issue, although Mr. Paulson is working with his team on this as well. We believe that student conduct that puts students in danger through these series of false alarms is completely unacceptable. Mr. Paulson echoes this sentiment, and I believe we might even have a student comment on that tonight, but I wanted everyone to know that we are working on this together, and it is a front burner issue, something that needs to be resolved. Number two, Stanford University is working with the county for a development agreement, which is being considered tonight. We received late notice of the work that they're doing with the county and submitted a letter on behalf of the school district to remind the county that the school district is impacted by the potential general use permit. Copies of that letter are in front of each board member, and we also have copies. Vicki, are those at the table? Copies at the table for the public, so everyone can see our response to Stanford. We have had our first meeting with staff at Stanford for the general use permit, just to remind people that the increase housing proposal from Stanford University is an issue created by the university, and we fully expect that they will come to us with some potential solutions to help mitigate the impact on the school district. And that's work that we're just starting to get into, just talking about process. Finally, this last Sunday, I was able to attend the CAC Family Fun Day. That was an event in Mitchell Park for families with students that either have IEPs or 504 combinations. Ms. Conway was with us, and Ms. Ellis, I'm not sure she's here today, but a lot of district staff was there. Numbers were over 200 in that 300 ballpark at the event, and just a reminder of how we have a lot more in common and some outstanding relationships with those families and students, and it's a great chance for everyone to see each other in a different role. So for that day, parents just got to be parents and kids got to be kids, and we were just there enjoying their spirit as well. So it's just a fantastic day, and thanks to everyone who organized this event. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is student board member reports. Ms. Furrier.
This past month at Pally, we had a new student luncheon with a huge turnout of a bunch of transfer students being welcomed by fellow Pally members, which was great. We also had a very successful 2-week-long volleyball tournament hosted by ASB. And we had a big club day with 90-plus clubs on 2 Fridays ago. Our week at Pally has been pretty busy. As you heard, we had 2 fire alarms this week, and it's become a common thing at Pally, and students, staff, and teachers are becoming quite fed up. But Mr. Paulson is working closely with ASB and student leadership to find solutions to this problem, along with things like vaping in bathrooms. And we're hoping to launch a campaign against vaping soon with admin. For sports, our football team is currently undefeated, which is great. Our ASB team is also looking to install more campus features such as skateboard racks for students. We also have a Centennial March to Pally on October 7th coming up, which is identical to the one in 1918 on the opening day of Pally, which is super exciting. Girls water polo team is hosting a treadathon this Friday from 4 to 8:30 to raise money for a charity, an athletic foundation for kids to participate in water sports. And ASB is super busy planning our Spirit Week coming up in the month, and our Spirit Week t-shirts are going on sale on our web store and are open until next Wednesday. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Prabhakar?
Yeah, so our SEC team had a couple of visitors over the past weeks. We had Dr. Austin come in to talk about student issues and hear from us on what he thought or what we thought the priorities were for the student body over the course of the year. We also had Miss Ania Bogue come to SEC for feedback and sexual harassment presentations and talk to us about what she thought was effective and what she thought could be improved for the presentation over this year. We also had our voter registration at Gunn today, so lots of students got the opportunity to pre-register and register to vote. Upcoming, we have the Mental Health Resource Fair Thursday at lunch, so Gunn students will get to find out about all the amazing resources, clubs they have, clubs like Rock, that can provide them with resources and supportive staff members and other students in campus. We also have Source of Strength peer leader meetings. So Source of Strength is kind of our campus strength in numbers programs that students can have people they can talk to and have leaders in their community. And then on Friday, we have our first freshman concert band concert. So they're going to have their first concert of the year. Next week, we have parent nights for freshmen and sophomores at Gunn. And the German students, the kids taking German, are hosting Oktoberfest, which is an annual food and games thing after school that we have at Gunn. SEC is in full swing for homecoming prep, which is going to be the last week of October, so 22nd to 27th. SEC, which is our student government, is doing impact projects. We're finding things in campus we can improve, such as getting more students involved with things like focus groups, making improvements in campus, and really doing anything that can kind of help the student body and figuring out what the student body needs and what we can do to help them.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out to the public that we have made some changes to our agenda to try to streamline it and rationalize it. So this is a reports section, which this evening includes a couple of other items. The first of which is item 2C, the California Voting Rights Act. And so what we are going to do is hear from one of the district's attorneys, Mr. William Tunick, about some information about the California Voting Rights Act. This is following on a letter received by the district regarding the California Voting Rights Act. And then there'll be an opportunity for public comment and some brief board comment if board members want to do that. Mr. Tunick won't be taking questions, but will be providing a presentation. Dr. Austin, did you have anything to add to that? Mr. Tunick.
Good. Thank you. Good evening, members of the board, superintendent, staff, members of the public.
Talk right into that mic because they can hear you on TV better.
Okay, is that better? You're not projecting. Good evening. Again, my name is William Tunick. I'm an attorney with Dennis Walliver Kelly, and the board asked me to come tonight to provide an overview of the California Voting Rights Act. As the board president mentioned, the district has received a letter regarding the CVRA, which is, again, the abbreviation for California Voting Rights Act, and wanted to have a short presentation tonight on really what the CVRA is about, as much as also what it's not about, because I think there's some can be confusion sometimes when this first comes up in a district. The one thing I did want to mention just right off the bat, this is an overview. This is very much the board's beginning of the process. This is not a situation where there's been any decisions made, and I believe this is on for information tonight. And additionally, we just mentioned, we'll talk about this towards the end of the comments, that we've been in discussions with the council who sent the letter to make sure that there's enough time beyond this week necessarily for the board to consider how they want to respond to the letter and move forward. So I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail when we get to that towards the end of the presentation. To begin with, we'll start with the law. That's always a good place when you're an attorney, I think. This is what the CVRA actually says. This is in the elections code. And as you can tell, it's not the clearest statement in the world, perhaps. But I think, again, one thing I wanted to talk about is what the CVRA doesn't say. So it's a little bit unique in a law in that what it does not say, what the legislature could have done is they could have enacted a law that says by 2020, all school boards will have this type of an election. And then everybody would have known by 2020, everyone was going to change to a certain type of election, which is what the CVRA is all about. Instead, what they did, and they could have also come up with a law that said, if you have over 50,000 ADA, you have to make this change. If you're below that number, you don't. There could have been bright lines, but the CVRA doesn't have either of those things. Instead, what you have is you have a law that says, and the legislature essentially kind of pushing this down to local school boards saying, if certain factors are present, there may be potential for someone to go to court and find that your elections are illegal or in violation of the law and force a change. And so it's sort of it's a little bit backwards, I think, from how we normally see these laws coming down from the legislature. The other couple things I wanted to mention about the CVRA that's important to know. First of all, it's not the same as the Federal Voting Rights Act, which has been around obviously a lot longer than the California Voting Rights Act. It's a variation, and I'll talk about the differences in a moment. But just to know that it's not the same law, because sometimes people confuse it with the Federal Voting Rights Act. The other two things is it does not require intent. So the fact that there's intent to discriminate or racism, any of that, that's not really part of finding if a court were to find a violation of the CVRA. It's also not results-based. There was actually a really interesting article, I think it was in the San Diego Tribune a couple days ago, talking about whether or not the CVRA has actually changed the composition of boards where it has been implemented and changed the election system, and the results are really varied. However, the CVRA doesn't look at what the results are. It only looks at the process, the election process, and which process a district may or may not be using. And the reason it does that, and if you'll forgive my illustrations here, but I hope it makes the point, this is what the CVRA, and actually part of the Federal Voting Rights Act, is about, what the theory behind it is. And you'll hear me say in theory, because what this does is this makes a lot of assumptions about, the federal voting rights makes assumptions about where folks live. CVRA doesn't do that, but it makes assumptions about how individuals vote as part of a group. But the basic idea is this, that if you were to have, let's say you have an election and you have a district, and in your district you have 60% of voters belong to a minority group and 40% belong to a minority group. If you have at-large elections, like most districts, actually most school districts do in the state, that means that everyone's going to vote for all 5 board members. What's going to happen is this is the big if voters vote according to their membership in either a racial, ethnic, or language group, so again, along these 60-40 lines, the majority is going to elect their preferred candidate to all 5 seats on the board, because in every election it'll be 60-40. If you switch to what we call, for school districts, we call by trustee area elections. This is district elections for city councils. It's a little bit more like your House of Representative elections, where you take your school district, and create geographical subdivisions, the same number of subdivisions as you have seats. So if a school board has 5 trustees, they'd have 5 trustee areas. And what you say is that only the individuals, the voters in those trustee areas get to vote for one member of the school board, and in order to run for that seat, the candidate has to live in that area. So again, it's very much like your House of Representatives. You don't vote in California for all the House of Representatives that go to Congress. You vote for the person who's representing your district. And so that's sort of the difference between at-large and by trustee areas. And theoretically, and again, we're making lots of assumptions here on that second graphic, But theoretically, if you implement that type of a system, what you'd end up with was you'd have the 60% winning elections 60% of the time, or actually three of those elections, and the minority would have their preferred candidate 2 of the time, or in 2 seats. So that's really how you can, this is just for illustration purposes, again, making a lot of assumptions, that changing the way that the elections function and operate can have an impact on ultimately what the outcome is. And that's really what the framers or the individuals behind the CVRA were after if you look at the legislative history. So I just mentioned that really the policy there makes, or that illustration makes a couple of assumptions, and I think those are kind of what's at the heart of the elements of the CVRA. So the first one is, and these are again, if a plaintiff goes and is looking to ask a court to find a violation of the CVRA, these are the things that they need to prove. First is, does a district use at-large elections? Well, that's a pretty easy one. Either you do or you don't for the most part. I would mention that under the, so the Ed Code talks about different types of election systems. Basically, as far as the CVRA is concerned, the only type of election system that avoids CVRA liability at all is by trustee area elections. That's what the code essentially says. So that's why you see, as we'll talk about in a minute, a lot of local agencies moving to by trustee area elections to avoid liability or a finding of a violation under the CVRA, because once you make that change from at-large elections, you're no longer subject to the CVRA at all. It becomes a non-issue. So that's the first element, which is by far the easiest one. The second two are kind of interrelated, but it's really the second one that is probably the biggest one, and this is whether or not there's racially polarized voting, and that's a term that comes from federal law. And what that is really talking about we're on the slide before when we were talking about this slide, and I was saying we're making the assumption that members of a protected class or a racial or ethnic or language group all are going to vote based on their membership in that group. That's essentially, in some respects, what racially polarized is talking about. Is that assumption true or not? Is that actually going on in voting? And that's not a very easy question to answer. It's not simply looking at the demographics of a district, students or voters, and comparing that with the board, but actually looking at how individuals are voting, which of course raises the question, how do you do that? And the answer is, because you can't go around and ask everybody how they voted, or you could, but it probably wouldn't work, is that they cross-reference demographic data based on census blocks versus turnout, or results in election precincts or precinct by precinct election results, and do a statistical analysis. And this has all been developed in the Federal Voting Rights Act context to figure out whether or not that actually exists or not. And unfortunately, as we'll kind of get into the next slide, I think, well, let me go back. The question I usually get on these is, okay, well, what's a violation and what isn't? And that kind of brings us to our next slide, which is, I think agencies throughout the state are still trying to figure that out, and that we have not had a successful defense of a CVRA action since the law was instituted. And obviously as attorneys, what we do when we have these type of laws is we look and we see where a court has said, this is the line, and if you're on this side of the line, you're not violating the law, and if you're over here, you are. And unfortunately, we've only had 2 cases of all the CVRA issues that have come up actually go up to a court of appeal level, and none of those have been decided on the merits. So there's a real lack of precedent in this area, I would say. So I think that's one thing to know about this. Obviously, the statewide impact, there's been a lot of, like I said, over 200 school districts now have made this transition, which in the scheme of things, actually, when you figure you've got well over 1,000 school districts, large majority are still using at-large elections. It's still going to be in the minority. The other thing I would mention, we talk about settlements there. Prior, maybe going back a couple of years, what was likely, or what was common, was for very large settlements, and actually the one that people always talk about, and you probably read if you Googled it, is there was essentially a dispute between Lancaster and Palmdale that involved the CVRA, and I think the city that lost ended up paying something like $6 million in attorney's fees, which was very much an outlier, but these cases routinely could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's actually one going on there was one that just ended in the city of Santa Clara. There's another one going on in Santa Monica right now, city of Santa Monica. And I think they've been in trial for 3 or 4 weeks on this issue. So to say it becomes quite a financial commitment for a district or a city to fight a CVRA lawsuit. Not saying that you shouldn't and that you can't and that you won't win, because someone is going to win one of these things, and they should. But so far, the districts have not gone there because, in large part, I think, because of the cost. So I was going to say, we talked about statewide impact, but locally you've had Morgan Hill Unified making the transition, Redwood City School District, San Mateo Community College District, all probably those within the past 5 years. And recently you had the city of Santa Clara lose its lawsuit, although I believe it's appealing that decision right now. So those are all kind of just nearby impacts. Finally, the last thing on there, I did mention there's a pending constitutional challenge coming out of, it's the former mayor of Poway, actually, in Southern California, that's challenged the CVRA on constitutional grounds. That case is still in the district court. I think it's going to be several years before it actually reaches some sort of resolution. So unfortunately, there's probably not a lot of guidance or real impact that that's going to have for quite a while. So the next two slides, and I kind of alluded this before as far as the timing. A couple years ago, when there were more of these letters coming out, the legislature put in a process, or implemented a process, I should say, sort of to formalize this, when someone brings this type of claim, and what the district's response can be, or the options the district might have. So what it essentially says now is that you can't just, a challenger used to be able to run off to court and file a lawsuit and say, you violated the CVRA, pay us $60,000. And the legislature said, well, that doesn't make any sense. So instead, what it requires is that if somebody thinks there's a violation or alleges there's a violation, they have to send notice to the school district. And of course, that's the position that the district is in right now. And that before or after that, the district can then adopt what's called an intent resolution is how we usually refer to it, which basically says, we received the letter, the board's deciding that they're going to intend to make this transition, and it gives an additional amount of time to actually make the transition and adopt trustee area maps, and we'll talk about in a minute. If that whole process is followed, then the legislature said the most that the attorney who sent the letter can demand, and they have to actually prove that they incurred the fees, is $30,000. So that's sort of a cap in some respects, so that's still a lot of money. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are timelines associated with these, and I know that there had been some discussion. In our particular case, we've been in communication with the counsel or the attorney who sent the letter. They understand that the board needs an appropriate amount of time to make this type of decision before taking any sort of action. So we've discussed and agreed to that there'll be more time for the board to make this decision. So the board is not pinned down necessarily to that initial 45 days, which I know is what the statute says. So there's going to be a little bit more time, as there really needs to be, to make this initial decision by the board. And actually, that brings us right to the letter, which I was going to mention. So this is an excerpt from the letter, which I believe was also attached to the agenda, which was received from a law firm in Southern California. Looked a lot like some of the other letters we've seen, which is also not out of the ordinary. Most of the letters are almost identical. So yeah, I mean, there's not much to say about that. You can read the letter. It's in the board packet. But as I said, we've been in contact and have gotten more time for the board to make a decision. The last thing I wanted to just talk about, and this was not to imply that there had been any decision made whatsoever. I just, from doing these presentations previously, I feel like if we don't talk about sort of the what ifs questions, then I always get a lot of questions about, well, if this happens, what does that process look like? And if we go to trustee areas, do we have an election and elect all new board members the next day? Those types of things. So I put this slide in here just to sort of provide answers to those types of questions. This is the process if a board, or actually the school board only, decides to change from at-large to by trustee area elections, because in order to do that, the board would actually have to develop trustee area boundary maps for those 5 trustee areas, decide what those boundaries are going to be. You do that through work with a demographer who specializes in this type of area. There's a series of public hearings and requirements around those that you would go through. And then it actually goes up to the County Committee on School District Organization, which would approve or deny, but in most cases approve the proposal. And then the final step is either the Education Code refers to an election, a yes or no election essentially on the entire proposal. All the school districts that have gone through this process have asked for and received a waiver of that requirement from the State Board of Education for a variety of factors that we could go into later if the board gets there. So, again, this is all hypothetical if the board were to go in that direction, but just wanted to provide that information tonight to not leave it hanging out there. So I know that was probably a little bit quick, but I hope that's a little bit of an overview. And I don't know why they put my picture on there, actually.
That's a nice touch.
Well, I always say, I'm there. Why do they need a picture? It's like, but in any event, I'm going to leave it on this slide. In any event, I hope that was helpful, and I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
It was very helpful, thank you, and we appreciate quick, actually, so thank you for that, too. As Mr. Tunick said, the board has had a couple of opportunities, these have been noticed on closed session, to receive some information about this. We thought it was important to give the opportunity for the public to provide comment, which you can do this evening by speaking, and all you have to do in order to do that is fill out a card, and then Vicki over there will take it, and then we'll get it up here, and you'll have a chance to speak. For open forum? Well, for right now, I'm talking about this item. In general, if you want to speak to an item, you can fill out a card for that item. There's also an opportunity coming up, open forum, where if you want to speak to an item that isn't agendized, you can do the same thing. Write a card out, and then we will have a chance to hear from you a little bit later in the evening.
Audience members considering coming up to speak but hadn't given a card.
Oh yeah, if you, we do need you to fill out a card though, so that we can know who's speaking. And also, though, if you want to provide comment on this issue and you don't want to speak tonight, or you're listening and you want to provide input later on, you can just write to board@pausd.org, and that will come to all of us. So we'll have an opportunity to read your feedback. As we've said, there's going to be no decision this evening. This is purely to hear from the public and to have some opportunity for board comment. So let's begin with public comment. I have one card, and there's maybe some more coming. So when you hear your name called, you can just go up to the podium, and then you'll have 3 minutes to speak. I have two cards, Steve Chesson and then Michelle Higgins. Mr. Chesson.
President Dauber and board members, my name is Steve Chesson. I'm president of Californians for Electoral Reform and a nationally recognized expert on electoral systems. I worked with the city of Menlo Park when they received a CVRA notice letter from a different attorney, a Mr. Kevin Schenkman, and I will give you advice similar to that I gave them, advice that they more or less followed. I note that Mr. Temescu's letter, since it is heavily plagiarized from the ones that Mr. Schenkman sends, does not demand that the school district go to trustee area elections. Instead, it asks for a discussion. If you haven't already done so, I suggest you begin that discussion. As a school district created by the charter of the city of Palo Alto, you have more options available to you than just single-member trustee areas that use plurality voting, and more options than available to school districts not created by a city charter. These include cumulative voting, limited voting, and ranked choice voting in both its single winner and multi-winner forms. The 3-minute limit doesn't allow me to discuss these options in detail, but I would be happy to educate you on them at a mutually agreeable time. You received the CVRA notice letter on August 14th. The 45-day safe harbor period for passing a resolution of intent to switch to trustee areas and forestall a lawsuit ends this Friday. I understand that you've received more time to adopt such a resolution. I strongly suggest you do adopt that resolution at a future meeting. Note that such a resolution does not commit you to switching to trustee areas, but it does buy you time, 90 days to be exact, to begin and complete the process for switching to trustee areas without being sued. In parallel to adopting such a resolution, and in parallel to beginning the process for switching to trustee areas, I suggest you open a dialogue with Mr. Temescu. See if he's open to negotiating a binding agreement that limits your liability to $30,000, gives you more time to explore your options, allows you to prepare a City of Palo Alto charter amendment for the March 2020 ballot that contains a mutually agreed upon solution, should you find one that is better than trustee areas using plurality voting. And should the charter amendment fail at the March 2020 election, still gives you time to adopt trustee areas with plurality voting for the November 2020 elections. Such an agreement would allow you to increase the amount of public participation in considering alternatives, and if necessary or desirable, in drawing trustee area lines. Since the earliest you could have trustee area elections is November 2020, more than 2 years away, if Mr. Temescu is reasonable, he should be willing to negotiate such an agreement. Since new lines would have to be drawn for the 2022 election anyway, after the 2020 census data is available, he might even be willing to postpone any conversion until then. You should also hire an expert who can help you determine if racially polarized voting actually exists in the school district. If it provably does not, you need not change your system, although you might want to for other reasons. I appreciate your consideration and would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Both my organization and the National Fair Vote organization with whom we work are happy to be resources for you at no cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chesson. Michelle Higgins?
Hi, thank you. And thank you to both previous speakers. It's a very interesting topic. I'm here to urge the board to stand strong against this lawsuit. If I thought the proposal to switch from at-large to district elections would actually result in a more racially diverse school board, I'd be all for it. But from every angle I've examined the issue, that seems highly improbable and comes with a raft of completely foreseeable negative consequences for our school board. I've been reading the same article that our attorney read from the San Diego Tribune, entitled, "Why School Boards Don't Always Become Diverse Even After Following California Voting Rights Law." In San Diego County, where a number of districts have gone ahead with this change after being threatened with similar lawsuits, the results have been unimpressive. And this is the case even in districts with large percentages of people of colour, because those communities are spread out or divided by district boundaries. In all the by-district school board races in San Diego for this November, half are uncontested. The pool of people who can contest each seat is even smaller. Our own district already struggles to get people to run for school board. There is one change that our school district could take that would address a real issue of minority voter disenfranchisement in our school board elections, even if it did not increase the racial diversity of our school board. We could allow parents of students attending PAUSD schools through the Tinsley program to vote in our school board race. This change would actually address the intent of the California Voters' Right Act to address minority disenfranchisement. The other very sensible change would be to set limits on campaign spending. This would open the door to candidates who lack the connections to raise the sort of funds it takes to win a race in Palo Alto. I don't believe the lawsuit will promote equity or diversity on our school board, so I just ask you to explore all the options. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Higgins. I don't believe we have any other cards for public comment. So there's an opportunity for comment by board members. Mr. Collins?
Thank you. Thank you for the useful presentation and comments. I guess all I want to say is I do think we take this issue very seriously. I mean, while it doesn't directly affect the students in our schools, the way our board is elected, I think, has tremendous long-term implications on the direction of our school district and the legitimacy of the school district, the school board in our community. And so I think it's awfully important that we take a deliberate process and assess our options and opportunities here to do the best electoral system we can. I personally agree with Ms. Higgins, based on what I know today, that I think citywide elections are beneficial in our community for a number of reasons, some of which you mentioned. I would be open to other systems of choosing within a citywide election. There are various proportional voting schemes that are used in various places in in the world and throughout the United States that are something that we could consider. Though, as the attorney pointed out, they would not immunize us from a challenge on the California Voting Rights Act. So I think we're going to spend a bunch of time on this. I want to assure the community that we're taking this all with an appropriate amount of seriousness, and I hope we get to a good resolution. Thank you.
Ms. Baton-Caswell?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important that we take our time on this. Any decision that's made is going to impact not just the community now and the board today, it will take it out into the future indefinitely. So we need to make sure we understand the implications of that. It's important that we hear from the community, and it's important that we hear different perspectives on the impact. One thing that's really important to me, and one of the things that anyone who's listened to me on the board knows that I've brought up over and over again, is how our responsibility is to every student in the district, not just the constituents that happen to like us or elected us, but all the students in the district. And that's something that's going to be very important to me as I consider this, that every student will be considered in the best way possible, and that we have an election system that supports that.
Mr. Brianza?
Just want to note, I think, in alignment with my colleagues, that this is something that we understand the seriousness of, and we've already been provided with some good information about it, and we're grateful for that. And we will continue to consider it moving forward and do what we think is best for this community and our students, all of our students.
Ms. Godfrey?
Ditto my colleagues, with special emphasis on appreciating some community feedback on this topic. Almost any methodology that gets us to having more people run for the board, I think, is to be welcomed. We have term limits on the ballot for November, so we will hear from the community directly on that particular topic, but I think these are somewhat related to how we get a board that's diverse, and I hope that folks will step up and write to us, board@pausd.org, with what you, any suggestions or input you have.
Student board members, Mr. Prabhakar?
Yeah, I think based on what I've seen about this process of moving from our current system to street, it's really long. So if we were to make sure that we do it really effectively, it's necessary to kind of remain patient and make sure that we do everything correctly. I think I agree with what everyone else said. It's really important that we get everyone involved in the process, and the more people who run, the more people get an opportunity to have their voice heard, the better.
Ms. Furrier?
I agree with Arjun, so no further comments.
Yeah, I think it's important, and I'm certainly committed to having a transparent and deliberate and well-informed process to proceed on this. This is a decision that is going to have implications long beyond the tenure of any of us on the school board. So I want to make sure that we do it well and that we do it with community participation. This is both a legal question and a political policy question about governance. So we kind of need to handle both channels of that. So, we're gonna have to handle the legal part and consider our options there. But really critically important is, what does the community think about how we should govern our schools? Because local government of the schools is a really important aspect of maintaining the kind of commitment that Ms. Baton-Caswell talked about to, making sure that we're serving every child. So this will certainly not be the last time that this appears on the public agenda, and we really do invite your comments. And certainly, please email them to us or take the opportunity the next time we talk about this. I think that's it for this item. Let's move on then to the next item, which is a report on the Carberly Master Plan. Dr. Austin.
Okay, the Cumberly Master Plan is getting some appropriate attention as things start to go into motion. So we've asked Dr. Golton to come tonight and introduce I'm not sure if I see his guest or not, but to frame up the topic for tonight, Bobby, thank you. So Dr. Golton.
Thank you. As you know, Cubberley was a school site until 1979 and has been leased to the city since 1990. In 2002, 8 acres of that Cubberley site was traded to the city for 8 acres under roof of Terman Middle School. The current lease calls for a master plan. There was a community committee that generated an 800-page report in 2012 and 2013. This has been a tremendous effort since we brought Concordia on in. Since we brought Concordia on in June of this year. The effort involved bi-weekly meetings of our team. Our team consists of Sharon and Ann and Ron Smith, and also the city, represented by Kristen O'Kane, the COO of Community Services. And here tonight is Monique Lekong Ziesenhen, who is Director of Libraries and Community Services. Again, a tremendous effort in terms, and I should mention Derek, who was involved in some of the social media reach out, although this event was reached out using Eventbrite, Facebook, Nextdoor, Twitter, and various email blasts. Actually, I haven't participated in a community meeting buildup like this, in the sense that as of last week, there were 183 participants signed up, and Bobby will update us. So let me give Bobby her actually promised 5 minutes to describe the process to you.
Thank you, Bob. Good evening, everybody. I can't tell you how excited we are for our first big community meeting on Thursday night at Cubberley, in the arena at Cubberley. And the latest update is that we have 222 people who have RSVP'd on Eventbrite. We're prepared for 300. I don't know what we'd do if we have more than that, but we're super excited that we have such a robust list of folks that are signing up for this. This is a 4-meeting process that will be an iterative process where people in the community can jump in anytime they are willing and able to do so. So we've had some people contact us and say, well, I'm not able to attend the first meeting. Does that mean I can't come? And the answer to that is absolutely not. You can jump into this process at any time. This is a process that's going to be very transparent, very collaborative. It is our co-design process. We already have a very robust website that resides at the school district with links to the city. And as Bob Golton mentioned, we do have a very robust social media blasts and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and everything else you can possibly imagine. So we're super excited. One thing I did also want to share with you is a key element of how we do this work, which is, again, inviting the community to actually sit down and do the work. And we have spent the past couple of months really interviewing and selecting community fellows. And we have 11 adult fellows and 4 student fellows that will be working side by side with us to help, first and foremost, to recruit people to participate in the process by connecting to their networks and their resources and families and friends and other organizations. And then they have been through a very robust training to understand how it is we do this work, which is to have them be there to help facilitate. They're not there with preconceived notions. They are not there with a special link to decision makers. They're there to be welcoming and supportive and to help community members sit at their tables with their peers and do this work collectively and together so that the master plan is one that is something that will benefit as many people as possible in the city of Palo Alto. This is really a once in multiple generation opportunity with a 35-acre piece of publicly owned property that just doesn't exist anymore in Palo Alto. And there is an amazing chance to do something that will be outstanding and of great benefit to people across the city. So we're super excited. Everybody's invited. There's room for everyone. We encourage all of you to come. And if you come, we ask that there's nobody that's standing in the back of the room. We really want you to sit down and be one with the other people doing the work. Let me also share with you, so you'll understand how the process goes, that we'll have this 2-hour meeting. Immediately after the meeting, we will have an evaluation that everybody will participate in. That will all get documented and posted on the website. As well, we will have a meeting summary document, so that will show everybody every single activity, every single word, every single drawing will be documented on the website, and then we'll do our analysis and produce a meeting summary, so that will all be available to people, and anyone that signed up will then receive that information as well as part of keeping them in communication with what's going on. And then that way, too, if somebody can't come to a meeting, there's easy access for them to go and find out what's taken place, get up to speed. But even if they don't, they can still walk into the meeting, sit down at the table, and make a contribution to the work over this period of time. So we're very, very excited and honored to have this opportunity to work with you, the school board, and the city team, and most especially the community. Any questions?
Thank you very much. This item is just for information so that we can inform folks, but certainly if there's comments or questions, board members,
Well, let me add just a couple of things. First, this is the first of 4 community meetings. So this kind of activity is not a sprint, rather it's a long marathon extending to next May. Secondly, the community fellows not only are training, but it's interesting that they have scheduled a dinner prior to on Wednesday. I can't tell you the name of the person or this person's address, but a dinner for these fellows to meet. And so they've developed in the course of this a great kind of esprit de corps.
thank you for that, and thank you everybody involved for the hard work that's brought us to this point. It's really impressive, I know. I have had the opportunity with Mr. Collins on the City School Liaison Committee to get updates on this beforehand, and it's really impressive. Any comments or questions? Ms. Godfrey, did you?
Sure. So I can see the excitement, and it is exciting to have sort of a diamond in the rough right there that we can work on. I have a couple questions. So 200 RSVPs is great. And frequently we have folks who aren't electronically connected, so some of our older residents. How did you go out and find people and get them signed up? Was it all electronic?
No, actually, part of the job that we ask of our fellows, and that's really one of the reasons why we bring them on the team, is these are people who live in the communities, who have relationships, who belong to clubs and organizations, who are oftentimes very involved in schools and other civic activities. And so we've asked them to knock on doors, hand out flyers, speak in some of their small groups, be it a book club or something like that. So the 222 that we have are signed up on Eventbrite, but we are fully prepared to have anybody and everybody come. As well, we will be having opportunities in between the meetings for people who can't come to potentially participate in a survey, and that may be something that fellows go out and do one-on-one with people or in small groups, as well as something like that being available online through the website.
Great. My other question is about the work that was done 5 years ago, and maybe
Yes.
this is a better question for Mr. Golden, I'm not sure. How do we take all of that work that was done 5 years ago and resulted in 100 pages and get it into the brains of all the people who need to know and incorporate it into the process?
Well, as Bob mentioned, we came on board in June. We've really spent the summer doing a deep dive in understanding and unearthing all of the work, not only the CCAC report, which is an incredibly rich document that has some very deep and important programming recommendations. The one fundamental recommendation that came out of that report was that the next step needed to be a master plan. So while it did do some major assessments and deep conversations about the appropriate activities and programs that should be on the site, that provides the foundation for the work that we're doing. As well, we've also gotten our hands on, the latest parks and recreation master plans and any other plans and programs across the city that could have an impact on decision-making around the program. So that really is the foundation. As well, in our interviews with fellows, we have spoken with a handful of people who served on that CCAC committee. So we have also spoken to them and gotten their personal input and opinions and thoughts and fears and all of those things. So that's fundamentally becomes the foundation for launching the project.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Collins?
No questions or comments.
Ms. Baden-Caswell?
Yeah, well, thank you for stepping up to do this. You're right, we do have a community asset that needs to be used well. I have talked to some people in the community, and I don't know if this is true or not, so maybe you can answer this. I was told that the school district put forward a non-negotiable, one non-negotiable, and that the city had put forward a list of non-negotiables. Since we haven't talked about this as a board, I would like to know, first of all, is this rumor true? And if it is, when does the board get to give some input to this?
Well, first, the school district hasn't put forward anything that is non-negotiable.
So this is a rumor?
Number one.
Okay.
Number two, we have, however, expressed the action that the board took in 2011 to say that there had to be provision for a school site. There had to be. And by the way, this was reinforced by the EMAC committee, not a board action, in the year 2014, the Enrollment Management Advisory Committee, and then also input from the two members, just the two board members on the City School Liaison Committee, which is sort of the logical committee to be overseeing this. Now, that said, there is going to be tremendous information generated by this first community meeting and the successive community meetings. And so there will be an opportunity, and we need to plan a venue where the board can digest this information. And then this is not the 2011 board, it's the 2018 board, and make decisions. Incidentally, the other sort of, it's one of the things that we've come to realize is there is an immense range of activities that can take place on this 35 acres. Why? Because this 35 acres was built to the standards of 1950 school construction, as opposed to the standards of 2018 school construction, and construction in general, which has more levels associated with it. We in the 2008 bond, for instance, had this revolutionary idea, incredible idea that met with severe resistance, the notion of a two-story building on a campus, and also the notion that you would have an elevator, and that elevator would have to be operated by students. And so what's going to be presented at this meeting is a tremendous range of opportunities, and yes, I'm agreeing with you, we need to have that board conversation.
So I would just like to ask Dr. Austin. I don't want the train to get ahead of our needs. And it's great to have input from subsets of the board, but I do think you need board direction on what the priorities are going to be. And I can definitely see a scenario here, because we've got very energetic and imaginative people in our community, where all the ideas get in front of what our needs are. So, Dr. Austin, can you make sure that we have this discussion in a timely way so that we don't get trapped in a place where we can't put our priorities forward? Thank you.
If I could add a little bit to that, just to maybe address your question. The term non-negotiable, that may have, someone may have heard us ask that question, because whenever we do a process like this, we want to understand from the beginning, and that term maybe is a little bit negative sounding, but we want to understand what's the playing field, what are the rules, what is the background information, and therefore, when we invite the community to come to the table, they understand those rules. They understand those constraints. They understand those needs of the owners, if you will. And so we don't want to send the community down a path that would ultimately meet resistance from the board. So it is very, very important, and we're very committed that you get this information as it is happening, and that you will have everything in advance of a meeting, and then have that feedback and that input from the community immediately afterwards. So as Bob Golden said, what we understand is that the school may very well need to have another high school. So we have to preserve and keep that in consideration as we plan for this. That would be the only thing.
And what I'm saying is, we haven't had that discussion that that's the only non-negotiable. So we need to have that discussion and make sure that that communication
Yes, of
goes
course.
forward.
Mr. Brianza?
Just thank you for your work so far. I'm so excited to see what happens next.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Ferrier, any?
Just a quick thing, I just want to applaud your student involvement on this project. I know of at least 2 people in our Pali community that are really excited to get involved, so I appreciate that.
Yes, absolutely. Students have the best ideas usually. They don't know what doesn't work yet. So we really like having the youth there.
Mr. Prabhakar?
Yeah, I agree with the student comment. Nothing else to add.
Great, thank you.
I think the community has waited a long time to see the school district and the city working together on a plan that that gets some improvements, some really important improvements done at Carberly. So I'm really excited about that. I remember when I think Jim Keene came to the City School Liaison Committee, and Ms. Baton-Caswell and I were there, and we really, it was really important to us to seize the opportunity. And Dr. Golton, I want to thank you for doing that, to get engaged in this process together and to build this relationship around this work. And it's really terrific to see it coming to fruition.
Great.
So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you very much for that. Let us move on to the approval of the consent calendar. This is a pretty unusual meeting to have 2 reports ahead of the consent calendar, so don't get concerned that our meetings are going to start to look radically different. We had 2 external reports that we wanted to get early. So the consent calendar is items that are approved as a group without comment, unless a member of the community or a member of the board wants to comment on them, in which case we pull them and place them on the action agenda. Are there any?
I move that we pull item G, which is the Escondido trip, the Spanish immersion trip, because we have several community comment cards.
I move that we also pull C and F.
So the C and F are the approval of the minutes for September 4th and the authorization to increase a legal contract for Goldfard and Lippman. Are there other items that anyone wishes to speak to? Okay, so
I move that we approve the consent calendar absent C, F, and G.
Second.
So moved and seconded that the consent calendar be approved with those exceptions. Student board members, preferential vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Board members, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So the consent calendar is approved with those with those changes, and those are moved to the end of the action items.
Can I make a proposal? Because we have so much community interest in 3G, the trip, can I move that we make it the first action item before we discuss the budget?
So this is a move to change the agenda by moving a consent item G to appear before item 5A. Is there a second? I'll second that. Is there a discussion?
There, just so the rest of the board knows, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cards here. So it makes sense to me, rather than have them sit here for 4 hours while we do the rest of our business, to do it now.
Okay, any further discussion? So this is a vote to change the agenda by moving item 3G to appear before 5A. Student board members, preferential vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Board members, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So we'll make that change. The next item on our agenda is open forum. So this is an opportunity to address the board on an item that doesn't appear on the board's agenda, and you can do that by filling out a card and then giving it to Vicky, and we'll get it up here. We have one item for open forum, or one speaker for open forum, Kathy Jordan. Ms. Jordan.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to briefly discuss the vaping on campus after hearing Ms. Furrier's board report. Well, Ms. Furrier, if I heard her correctly, graciously discussed some efforts that the students could make. And I think I heard Dr. Oskin discussing working on student behavior related to vaping. Unless I missed something, I'd just like to point out that vaping is very much the district's problem to solve. And it also is pretty much wholly on the district's plate. While student behavior must be modified, actually the district also must modify its behavior. Be proactive about handling this problem, which apparently may be affecting our students' education as well. Vaping is actually considered smoking under the law. Smoking is not permitted in public buildings. The school district is a public entity which partly consists of public buildings. Smoking is not permitted in public buildings. So it is the district's responsibility to police these bathrooms and elsewhere in the public buildings that this takes place, not necessarily just shift the burden of solving this onto student behavior, solely imposing penalties on students, but the solution must involve both. The district has to step up to its responsibilities, police the bathrooms so the rest of our students can use them. Please police the bathrooms, please stop the vaping, let's figure it out so our students can make use of our instructional minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jordan. I don't believe we have any other comments for open forum, so we'll move on to the first action item, which is 3G, the Escondido Elementary School students' field trip to Mexico. Dr. Austin?
Yes. First of all, thank you for moving the item up so that we can hear from our public comment tonight. We've put pretty fair amount of time into this topic because it's complicated. I think first and foremost, everyone, including every speaker here tonight, is concerned about safety of students in general, and that's where we are starting our discussion tonight. We have also looked at the actual board policy, and I might offer that while I'd like to have some more discussion about the board policy in general, I think it may have been misinterpreted in the past. As far as do overnight field trips in general need board approval, it has a funny wording in it, and I can tell you the first time I read it, I interpreted it one way, and then when it was held up to me with a different interpretation, I could see that side as well. But in this particular case, regardless of the interpretation, this is something I'd like to bring forward to the board for them to weigh in and to make sure that we have all bases covered before sending our students off on a field trip. So, Ms. Conaway, do you have anything to add to the vetting process that we've put in place so far?
Just to clarify that part of our process is to make sure that our risk management office takes a look at the conditions in whatever location our students are traveling in. And once that's done, the major piece that we're looking at is how connected this is to the curriculum and what experiences the students will be having as a result of that. You know, the staff, I think, has gone back and forth in terms of this particular trip, because as you know, we've consistently had some concerns around the area and location in Mexico that causes some concern. But there certainly is, you know, there are many points made regarding the level of security that we are comfortable with assuming, and the level of risk we're comfortable with assuming. And we're right now at a level 2, and traditionally our students have been able to travel at that level. But we are also considerate of the fact that this is an area with some concerns regarding safety and violence in the area.
I'll just finish with, before we head to questions, no item of this type will appear on an agenda if it is not the recommendation of staff for approval. So I just want you to know that the appearance of this item is evidence that we do support this recommendation.
Okay, so let's hear from members of the public who would like to comment. So I'll read 3 at a time, and so that you'll know that your turn is coming up, and then you can just come to the podium when you're called. So first is Helen Yenny Komshian, and Jeff Barnett, and Alan Chu, and I'll make my obligatory or customary apology for all of the names I'm going to mispronounce tonight.
You did well with my name. I'm Helen Yenny Komshian. I'm a parent of a 5th grader at Escondido. And we have a big showing of Escondido parents here tonight because we feel very strongly about this field trip and what a wonderful opportunity it is for our children who have been in the Spanish immersion program. I'd first like to thank you for your concern and for looking out for our children, because of course their safety is of utmost importance to us too, and we would never want to put our children in harm's way. Our principal has shared with us tonight before the board meeting the articles that somebody on the board has found relating to increased violence in Guanajuato. And she also shared with us a conversation that she had with the director of the school where our students have been going. And the information that we've obtained is very reassuring to us, actually, because we have heard that that just like areas of the United States that you wouldn't go to at night, even in our own area, you probably wouldn't go to certain parts of Oakland or San Francisco or San Jose at all or at night, yet we still go on field trips to Chabot Planetarium in Oakland. The same is true in Mexico, and that we feel confident that it is possible to do this field trip safely. And we would, of course, follow any developments that occurred, and if the State Department changed the threat level for Guanajuato, we would not want to send our children if the level went above a 2. I just wanted to reiterate, though, that this trip is very important to our school. Not everybody, could I just see a show of hands, who is here from Escondido on the issue of the field trip? So you can see it's almost half the audience, and not everybody is going to speak tonight, but we've had, this is something that our children have looked forward to since kindergarten, and I've not had a child go on it. I have a daughter who was in the English program who's older, and I see what a tremendous opportunity this is for our Spanish immersion students to get connected to Mexican culture, Hispanic culture. And I think that this is very important, especially in this day and age, when in today's political climate, when we have a president who calls Mexicans rapists and drug dealers. I think that an activity like this that promotes understanding and tolerance is especially important. And so we just ask for the ability of,
So I'm going to have to ask you
Okay.
to conclude, but I think your position is really clear. But you can also
Okay.
share it with the board, although I think we're probably going to make a decision tonight at board@pausd.org.
okay.
So thank you.
One more sentence?
Yes,
It's
one
just
more
that we
sentence.
ask for the ability of parents to decide if this activity is appropriate for their children rather than for it to be categorically off the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Barnett, Alan Chu, and Luis Artola.
Hi, thank you all so much. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. It's a little bit out of order. I think my comment's more of a me too that might have come at the end of the comments rather than one of the first ones, but I can't help how the cards are called. So my comment was really just a personal experience. Last year, my wife and I traveled for a week exactly in the area where this trip will take place. And we spent quite a lot of time in San Miguel de Allende, which is one of the destinations on this trip. And we had occasion to talk to a lot of locals and a lot of expats because we were actually considering moving there in the future. So we had a vested interest in understanding exactly what's going on with crime, with the culture generally, et cetera, et cetera. And I can say from our personal experience and talking to dozens and dozens of people who live in that area, it's incredibly safe. I felt safer there than many other areas in the United States, and I feel very comfortable sending my precious little daughter on this trip. So thank you so much. Please give it every consideration.
Thank you. Alan Chu, Luis Artola, and Kelly Younger.
Hi, my name is Alan Chu. My daughter is in the Spanish immersion program at Escondido, 5th grade, and I believe she wrote a letter to the board. I don't know if everybody has read it, but when she heard that the trip might be off the table, she got really anxious. We have 2 older children who have graduated from the same program, and the older one went to Costa Rica, and the second oldest one actually went to the same site that my third daughter is going to go to if the trip is approved, and we'll send her to this trip. And just wanted to share with you the positive experience, educational experience that my 2 older children had coming back from the trip, especially our second child. He's not particularly gifted in language and hadn't been confident in speaking in Spanish. But after the trip, he became very fluent. He's comfortable speaking with Spanish speakers even here after the trip. And because he had that lived experience of spending a full week with Spanish-speaking peers just like himself, without prompting, without coaching, and he was completely independent. And I was just so glad to see him blossom in his Spanish-speaking abilities. And I also wanted to commend the school teachers and staff for the care that they have put into arranging these trips and making sure that every student is well taken care of and have safe and happy and an educational experience. So I have every confidence that they will do the same with this trip as well. So thank you for the board members' concerns about the safety of our children. We are just as concerned as well, and we're confident that this is going to be a safe and positive experience for all of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Luis Artola, Kelly Younger, and Mike Wilcox.
Hi, excuse me. I'm Luis Artola, and I'm here to kind of help balance the opinion on the security concerns. Of course, there are things that are happening all over the place. I happen to be born in León, Guanajuato. I was born and raised there. I lived for 22 years, and I witnessed a small town of about 500,000 people grow to like more than 1.5 million now, and it's probably close to 2 million. And of course, the security concerns of a city like that is no different than any other city of that size anywhere. I would think that most people will think that Europe is very safe, but for people from Hispanic heritage, I lived there for a year back in '98, and the concern was skinheads for Hispanic people. There were a lot of reports of people being beaten up, but still, people go out and live their lives and learn from other cultures. And I think that's one of the key things here is that our children are not only learning a second language, they are absorbing a culture. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity, and I'm very grateful for the staff, like the other parents mentioned. They know they've been there. They know this place, And, they're fantastic people. And I think this is as controlled an experience as we can provide to our kids. They travel in groups. They go, there's an international airport that is about 100 miles away from Dolores. And, they travel in buses. They have people around. And, I have family and friends over there. And one of the things that I will offer is that, we have connections there if they need anything, and they have, more chaperones. I'm sure we can wrangle some people to help out. And I think that's an important thing, to give them that opportunity. And the ask is very simple. I'm just going to echo what other people say, is that please approve this and let parents decide whether this is good for their kids or not. And I appreciate your concern about the safety of our children, but I think this is, we have the option to live in fear and not go anywhere, or be responsible and take, and provide our kids also an opportunity to go out and experience what it is like to live in other cultures and have more understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly Younger, Mike Wilcox, and Vince O'Hara.
Hello. Thank you for having us. I'm a parent of a 5th grader also at Escondido, and I appreciated hearing tonight. We met as a school to talk about more of the safety concerns, and I appreciated hearing that the school is considering, will have the appropriate amount of chaperones to ensure safety. And I also wanted to share that from my perspective, part of why I'm advocating for the trip is I myself have worked in schools the past 5 years, including PAUSD, as a social worker and guidance counselor and therapist in many roles. So as someone who does think about the safety of all students, I still think it's a great opportunity for our students. And also as someone who's lived in places that are generally considered dangerous in Mexico, Brazil, and El Salvador, I would still gladly bring my daughter to places that are known for having some violence. So I would just encourage you all to vote in favor of the trip. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Wilcox, Vince O'Hara, and Amelia Jack.
Hello, board members. It's a pleasure to be here. My son, Kian, who's in 5th grade. If he feels courage, he might say something, but I don't know. I speak as representative of our family. Our children have participated in Spanish immersion throughout their lives. Our oldest daughter, Hannah, is 18, and now is freshman at De Anza College. Jocelyn is 16 at Gunn, and Kian is now in 5th grade. All of them have participated in Spanish immersion. Unfortunately, Hannah and Jocelyn's trips to Mexico were canceled due to the actions of a small group of vocal parents. I am an anthropologist and archaeologist by training, and have taught at Stanford in the anthropology department since 2001. I have traveled throughout the world with students for the past 2 decades. I say this for 2 reasons. First, as someone trained in ethnographic methods, I can say without qualification that there is no more valuable experience for any person, but especially young people, than being immersed in another culture. The 5th grade trip is invaluable in this respect. Our children have traveled throughout Mexico without any undue concern. Second, if a person Googles articles on crime in the United States, they will find that many nations have placed the U.S. on a no-travel status. I'm fully aware of the concerns voiced by some members of the board. I do not believe that a cursory news search should characterize an entire nation's safety or well-being. One only need to look at the nightly news to be alarmed by the ways in which whole countries or ethnicities have been maligned based on their color or where they're from. I don't support a top-down version of this. I don't think that you do either, but we want to have the chance to have our children participate in this experience. And we hope that you'll listen to the other board members. You want to say anything? No. I tried.
Thank you. We're pretty scary, I understand that. Vince O'Hara and Amelia Jack.
Good evening. First, I'd like to thank the board for their due diligence on this important matter. I just want to echo a few points that have been said before. I want to assure the board that the parents are aware of the reports of violence in Guanajuato. I want to also note that violence is a concern in the United States as well. I'm confident that the State Department risk assessment is an appropriate, conservative, and objective criteria for us to assess the security risks and whether or not we can move forward on this. I'd like to request your support and encourage the district to not impose undue burdens on the travel of our students as they make their way to the site, specifically with respect to potentially having to travel during the evening to get from the airport to the site, and so that they don't have to take a less convenient, more onerous route there. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Amelia Jack.
Hi, good evening. My name is Amelia Jack. This is my daughter, Anitra. She is now a current 5th grader at Escondido. She began her education here in Palo Alto School District in the TK program and began the immersion program in kindergarten. And I feel like this trip is just that. We call this a Spanish immersion program, and the students should be immersed directly into the culture after they've spent the last 6 years learning about the culture, reading about the culture, participating in activities pertaining to the culture. And for these students, they've spent an immense and countless amount of hours studying and reading and writing and speaking the Spanish language and just learning about everything. So I think this trip is kind of like the culmination, a reward to their efforts and hard work that they've put in. And it kind of be a travesty of justice for them not to be able to enjoy this trip, but also learn from fellow peers that they can just enjoy speaking with. I mean, I've spoke Spanish, but her speaking to me at home is not the same as her taking a trip and being immersed in this culture. I think that they've come so far. They've got this bright and shining light at the end of this journey that they've only just begun, so to speak, but it kind of be like extinguishing it, this flame, if they weren't allowed to go on this trip. And I really don't believe that that our staff and the staff at the program in Leon would actually put them in any sort of harm's way. But I do believe that if the threat increases, yeah, I agree that we should look this over and reconsider. And being in law enforcement and being from East Palo Alto, born and raised, my husband and I, violence is everywhere, but there's also light and change that occurs as well, which I know you guys have all seen. So I thank you for listening, but I feel like all of us as parents are reassured that our children will be safe and this will be an experience that they'll never get again in a lifetime. Thank you. You want to say anything? No?
I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for speaking. Let's take whatever questions and comments there are from board members before we proceed to question of action. Mr. Branza?
I am happy to go along with staff's recommendation and approve this without hesitation. Of course, I like the parameters that you put in place. If there's an elevated risk, we reconsider. But having spent a significant amount of time in Guanajuato and San Miguel, I'm really excited for our kids to get to go there. It's a fantastic place.
Ms. Godfrey?
I think, Ms. Brown, should I be directing my questions at you? Okay, great. This is a capstone trip for the 5th graders. My children were at Escondido in the traditional program and are very familiar with how this works. And so I have a couple questions about how it works now, since it's been a few years since my kids were there. In those days, there were parent chaperones who were chaperones miles away in a place where they could be called upon if needed. But they weren't in the camp doing the residential life there. Is that part of the program now? I can't remember how far away they were, but they were sort of elsewhere, out of sight, out of mind, and they came if something was needed, not that anything ever was.
I see them all discussing back there, if that is still the case.
Does this sound familiar to you?
Can you come up to the podium so that it
come
gets
to the lectern
recorded?
and-
Thank you.
My other question, while Ms. Bailey's making her way up, is there a trip for the 5th graders at Escondido who are in the traditional program still? Thank you.
So to answer
Could you
the
just
second-
introduce yourself
I'm
too? Sorry.
My name's Nina Bailey. I'm the teacher librarian at Escondido. I've been in the Spanish immersion program since 1999.
Great, thank
So I was originally a classroom teacher, and now I'm the teacher librarian. So the second question first, yes, there is a program, I'm sorry, there is a trip for the English, as our kids call it, English immersion. But the traditional school, they go to Mount Herman, which is a science camp in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and they spend 5 days there. In answer to the first question, so originally when the trip started, there was a lot of parent interest in traveling. They weren't taken along as chaperones, but they were individuals who wanted to accompany the trip and basically were sort of there as this adjunct group who went on the plane with us, but weren't actually with us, and then did their own thing, and then we met back again. What we found, because there was a one-day visitation, was that for a lot of the children who didn't have anybody with us, it was really difficult to have parents of other children come visit the camp and see that their own family members weren't there. Likewise, it was really difficult for those children whose parents did come and visit because it broke their routine, and also in some instances it made it so that they were much more homesick once their family members left. And so I would say probably about 5 or 6 years into the trip, we started to taper that off, and at that point, it just was staff members who were going as chaperones.
Okay, thank you.
So in answer to your question, no, parents don't accompany us.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure how to describe it, because the way I remember it, it felt a little like a boondoggle, because the parents went and they were someplace else.
Yeah, it was a
And they were
little,
like
it was
there
like
just in case.
a justification of a short vacation.
Yeah, can I sign up?
Well, I'm sure it made the trip easier on the plane to have extra adults around, but it sounded like after that, they were kind of off duty in case, unless of an emergency. Okay. And, okay, those are my only questions. Thank you, Ms. Bailey.
If I could add, I do believe the principal is planning on attending this trip as well.
With the kids or in the resort?
That's a really good question. If it's not, I'm going with her. No, yes, with the children.
Okay, thank you. I'm ready to support this.
Mr. Collins?
I have an article that I'll pass out to the board members. That's from the May 5th edition of The Economist magazine. And there are some additional that maybe we can provide to the audience. The headline is Mexico's murder rate heads for new record, and it is specifically about the Mexican state of, how do we pronounce it? Thank you. Amen. And if you turn to the second page, there's a large graph that basically shows the murder rate for this state versus the national average for Mexico starting in 2011 and ending in the first quarter annualized rate for the current year, which was the most recent data available. And you can see that circumstances have changed, and that's basically what this article describes and is about how because of various gang activity and illegal activity in the state that has spilled over from neighboring areas, that this murder rate has risen astronomically. And to the point of one of the people who said, there's murder everywhere, I looked up the murder rate in Oakland and San Francisco while we were listening to the comments, and San Francisco is 18 per 100,000. Oakland is 20. This state in the first quarter, at least, was 50. So it is significantly higher at this point than either of those two places. So I think this trip is great. I love this trip, but I'm not going to be ready to support it. And I really want to direct my comments to the staff, because I think the staff has not done its job yet here. And I was disappointed with the material that we received, and I was disappointed with being asked. I was disappointed that I had to Google the name of this state plus murder on the internet to find out that, in fact, there was a safety issue in the state at all. And if I hadn't done that, I would have just blithely approved this on consent. We weren't provided any information about the safety issue in this place. We weren't provided any assurances about how the safety issue was being addressed. We weren't provided any information to allow us to make a reasoned judgment. We were just asked to rubber stamp it. And I think that's inappropriate. I think the staff let us down on this. And I'd be prepared to support this if we were given proper assurances by the staff that in fact the safety situation at the specific places where these people are going to go are addressed, that the chaperone level or whatever kind of security provisions are available for these children are appropriate, and that we know, we don't just trust, we know that we have taken all the steps that we can to ensure the safety of these students. I can't agree, though I certainly sympathize with the view, let the parents decide, because the problem is, this is, unfortunately, it's a school-sponsored activity, which means we're on the hook, we're responsible, all the taxpayers of Palo Alto are responsible for this. And our job is to ensure that we have taken the proper steps that our children will be safe. I think everybody needs to rely on that. So I'm very enthusiastic about this trip. I hope to be able to approve this trip at a subsequent meeting, but I don't feel, based on the information that I have today, that I could, in good conscience, approve this trip. I would love to have more information. Thank you.
Is there any, does staff want to make any response or follow-up?
Sure. We talked to...
It's only fair.
Yeah, thank you. We talked to our insurer, who suggested these 4 additional items, which I do not think were on the Mexico trip that we brought forward last year. And they felt these 4 things should be in place. Right now, the security level is a 2 in this area, same as in London and England and most of Western Europe. A state nearby is a 3 and another one is a 4. Today, the principal did call down to the man that runs the camp and specifically talked about those incidents that had happened. And he did say, yeah, you know, there has been more violence. It's mainly between 2 rival cartels who are fighting over a pipeline. And, you know, she could speak to more of the conversation she had with him, but he still feels that it is a safe trip for the children. In our guidelines, the key elements is that if 2 weeks before and including departure date, the United States travel advisory is greater than a 2, the trip will be canceled. And we ask that the parents sign up for the travel insurance, and also that we have 1 certified staff member for every 10 children. I think in the past, maybe it has been 2, and now we have to have 4, or 1 for every 10. It used to be 2 certified and classified staff that would go. Now we're sending all certified.
Mr. Collins?
I mean, thank you. That's useful information. I guess I don't feel like it's sufficient. I mean, let's be direct. I mean, the person who runs the camp has incentive. It's hard to rely necessarily on the person who runs the camp to tell us that the camp is safe or not. I would certainly think if he told us the camp was not safe, that would be a strong indication that we shouldn't go. But the fact that he tells us that the camp is safe is necessary but not sufficient in my view to kind of really believe that it's safe. So I'd love to get more information on this. I don't know what other information we can get. Right. I don't know how the State Department sets its travel advisory standards. I didn't have a chance to look up what Tijuana was. We didn't approve a trip to Tijuana a few months ago. Are they 3 or 2?
Yes, Tijuana's a 3 right now.
There are 3 now. Were there 2? I think at the time of the trip, there may have been a 2.
It was fluctuating, yeah.
It was a 2 at the time of the trip, and we turned down that trip. So, and again, I mean, let me just read a couple things from this article just to put a point on it. In El Paso del Grande, am I over time? Sorry.
Why don't you go ahead? No, you're not.
I'll just finish up. In El Paso del Grande, the bodies are stacking up. In the first 3 months of this year, the municipality of 85,000 had 43 murders, up from 20 in all of 2016, about the same number as London, a city 100 times larger and currently panicking about its high murder rate. I mean, you can read the article. It goes on about the things that are going on there. It's disturbing. And I'm very hesitant to put our students in harm's way. I love this trip. Everything that people said that was positive about this trip, I agree and more. I couldn't sleep at night thinking that I was a board member who sent a child in harm's way. So I really would look for some kind of assurance, and I'm happy to work with you guys to what kind of assurance would convince me. Maybe my colleagues will make that moot, but that's my feeling.
Yeah, any direction on what you think that might be? I mean, can we say 100% that they're going to be safe? No.
Of course.
Right? Of course not. So any suggestions you have of,
Well,
I'm open to hear them.
Maybe my colleagues will make it moot, so.
Okay.
Ms. Peyton-Caswell?
I actually have a lot of confidence in the State Department's analysis. Every year, my family goes to Mexico, and last year we went, and I know some of my friends here were sending me emails about, oh, how could you go down there? Did you see what happened? States are big places, and everything, the safety is in specific, we need to pay attention to safety in particular places. So I think if we have the State Department saying it's a 2, I feel comfortable with that. If it changes, I don't feel comfortable with that. I do think it's our responsibility to pay attention to these things. I do think actually that we do have to talk to, you can't rely only on the camp's leadership, but you do have to talk to them as well. And we need to make sure that the safety plans and considerations that they have make sense. Do you want to talk to that? I mean, just when you called down there, I assume you asked more than, is it safe? Did you ask what would they do if there was a problem?
Mrs. Samos de Carvalho, perhaps she was the one who spoke with them.
Oh, okay.
Good evening. So when I called over to the camp last night, we talked about a lot of things. And my first question to him was, you know, are the reports true? Where are these cities in relation to the camp? And so we had a long discussion about that. And some of the areas are along the lines of some pipelines. And so when I then later looked at the map and circled where were these escalated violent incidents occurring, you know, they are at a distance from the camp. And I sent Ms. Brown my PowerPoint that has that schematic. So we talked about that. We talked about, you know, do we travel at night? No, we do not travel at night. How do you, what kind of roads do you travel on? And they are toll roads, so they're well maintained and they're monitored. They charter buses, urban buses and tourist buses. So the urban buses are chartered so that they can get the kids to the closest destination when they're visiting, I think it's San Miguel de Allende, and no, it's Dolores Hidalgo and Querétaro. So, you know, they're making an effort to get the kids as close to the tourist destinations rather than just using tourist buses that have to leave you at a distance. So, you know, those kinds of security measures are going above and beyond, you know, getting the kids as close to where they need to get to visit. The camp itself is located on a working farm where there's one main gate that is secured. The road is 3 kilometers to get to the campsite within the farm. And there are cameras and also security points around the perimeter of the camp. Sorry, around the perimeter of the farm. And then the camp itself has a a walled, like a fence, all around the area so that when you enter through that gate, you're even a little bit more protected from farmland animals, whatever it might be. So with all of that, I thought, okay, they've gone to some great measures to kind of delineate the entrance. They have security around 4 points and around the perimeter of the property. There are cameras so you can see cars coming onto the property, and there's communication between that checkpoint and the camp itself. And then mentioning that, they do take one of the roads that they take, they purposely avoid the road where the cities that the violence had been occurring, they avoid that area. So they're making some concerted effort to avoid, running into or being around areas that had that violence that exploded in the last 6 months. So those are the things that we talked about. And did he say, oh, no one, it's 100% safe? I don't think anyone can guarantee that anything is 100% safe. So he didn't say that. He answered my questions about where's the violence, where did the violence occur, who's involved in it, are the articles accurate, and what does the camp do to kind of avoid us being involved or close to those areas. And so he addressed those.
Thank you. Ms. Baden-Caswell, did you have anything else?
Just, do we have a safety plan if something does happen nearby?
If something happens nearby, I think that, his explanation was that it's so far off from the main road. And I think the teachers could probably speak to that, but we don't have a safety plan. If they have safety plans within the camp in terms of an emergency, I don't have those details right now because I haven't been on the trip and I haven't heard the orientation, but I could probably bring one of the teachers up to talk about what kind of safety plans they have at
I'm
the
not sure
camp
that's
itself.
necessary, Ms. Baden-Caswell, unless you.
I just want to know that we have a safety plan if there was a problem and that we've asked about it.
Yeah.
We actually should have this for any trip, by the way.
So the camp has a safety plan.
The camp does. And I'm sorry, I don't have the detail of that because I haven't actually participated in it yet.
We'll make sure we have full details and share those with you.
Great. Ms. Baden-Caswell, did you have anything else?
No, I actually don't necessarily need to know all the details. I just want to make sure we have one. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Prabhakar, any comments or questions?
Yeah, I guess if a lot of safety precautions are taken, I think this trip does have so many benefits. I've taken Spanish for a while, and I know that having a trip like this, an immersion opportunity, would have been really good. And I kind of wish that I'd done that. So it's a really good opportunity for these fifth graders to be able to do this. And just looking at the State Department website, other countries that have a level 2 travel advisory, like France, the Maldives, I don't think anyone really fears going to the Maldives. So level 2 doesn't seem to be that much of a risk. I also think using the murder rate as a broad-based determination for how dangerous a place is kind of misleading, because even in a place like San Francisco, different parts of the city have different crime rates, have different circumstances. So just using the crime rate for an entire state is kind of misleading, and maybe kind of going beyond that and looking more specifically at the exact places where kids are going on this trip would be better. That's all.
Ms. Furrier?
I think it's more than evident that the majority of the Escondido community is in favor of this trip, so I have no hesitation to support it. I just have one question about if the State Department ranking has been fluctuating or if it has been consistently at a 2 for a while.
Yeah, it's been consistently at a 2.
I certainly appreciate the trip. I appreciate Mr. Collins' raising these concerns because they're motivated by interest in the safety and security of students. I am prepared to support the trip. I would like to make a motion, though, that speaks both to the trip and to the process, because I think there are some process questions here. So I'm going to move that the trip be approved as set forth here, that staff prepare a proposal for a summary to accompany field trip requests that summarizes the safety and security situation in the proposed destination and the steps being taken to mitigate it, and that come to the BPRC for modification of the board policy relating to field trips.
Those are two separate things, or are you putting it all together?
I'm putting it all together in one omnibus motion.
I second the motion and have an amendment. My amendment would be to, at the same time, clarify the language in the BPRC that Dr. Austin raised, which is ambiguous is the most generous term you could use, in terms of whether overnight field trips and out-of-state field trips generally, as well as international field trips, are required to come to the board or not. And I'm fine with whatever the answer is, but I think the policy now is hard to interpret.
So it's an amendment to add to direction to the BPRC to clarify that question.
Yes.
I'll second that. I'm seconding his amendment. I'm just trying to move us along. Is there any discussion of that amendment? Student board members, preferential vote?
Aye.
Board members, all in favor?
Aye.
Any discussion on the, so that amendment is adopted. Any discussion on the motion as amended?
I would just say, I'll piggyback on what Mr. Collins said originally. You should know by now that we're going to find whatever it is, that detail that we need. And so you should be prepared to play devil's advocate in your own office, because you know somebody on this board will. So it's probably a good learning experience. It sounds like an update to the board policy will answer the question for this particular issue, but I think in general, it's probably good practice to expect that there will be a devil's advocate on the board, and that you should understand what's out there in the public realm, information-wise, and prepare us to discuss it.
Yeah, and that's really the point of my proposal, is to make sure that we arrive ready to have that discussion.
If I could just piggyback on, do you mind, on Ms. Gottfried's comment. I mean, you put us in an awkward position, right? Because we had to not only surface issue about safety, but then discuss it, pull this off consent, and then discuss it at a live meeting and bring parents out who are all concerned that their trip isn't going to get approved. And if we revise the process and do this research and get the information to the board ahead of time, I think that would make a much smoother process for both the board and the community and yourselves. So I think we're a learning experience for all of us.
So-
Any further discussion?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing, and I think having a safety plan wherever you take students to, even for a day trip, is pretty important. And it doesn't have to be, 18 pages, but if something happens, that we know what we're doing, so it's not a panic situation. So maybe the BPRC can add that to whatever you're writing up.
We can, well, I think staff heard that. It might be what the staff direction is, if the motion is adopted, is to prepare that language for the BPRC. Mr. Branza, did you have a comment?
I just want to say that I don't think staff put us in an uncomfortable position. I think you all did your homework. I think you all decided that it was safe based on the State Department rankings and everything else you knew, and I appreciate that. So I just want to note that.
Okay, any further comments or discussion? All in favor of the motion as presented? Excuse me, student board members preferential vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Board members all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
No.
So the motion passes by a vote of 4-1 with Mr. Collins dissenting. Okay, thank you, folks, for turning out. Let us, let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll proceed with the rest of the meeting. Otherwise, please take your seats, or you can take your conversations outside. We're going to resume our meeting as soon as we have everybody we need.
I'm gonna eat this whole bag, I swear. Already at 3.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is item 5A, the ending balance and budget update for the 2018-19 resolution. Dr. Austin?
This is the second time this item has come before the board. Dr. Novak would like to point to one revision, so I'll turn it over to Dr. Novak at this point.
At the last board meeting, Kathy Mack presented all the information. This has all been discussed by the board, but the one item that is changing is the revision of the property taxes. We mentioned that to the board that it would be decreasing and provided in a board update, and it's decreased by $793,000 from the original update. Other than that, the presentation is exactly the same as at the last board meeting.
Okay, do we have any public requests for public comment on this item? I don't think so. Okay, board questions or comments? Mrs. Baton-Caswell.
I just have one point I want to make. I appreciate you giving us the update. And I also just want to clarify that this is a decline in an increase. Okay, I'm not sure everyone understands that. I had a couple of calls that were sort of odd today, saying, we're in another property tax hole. And I was like, no, our property tax has increased. It's just the increase is less than we were hoping it was last time, but it's still an increase.
Correct. It'll be over 6.4% increase in the property taxes.
Which is a good news for us.
Exactly, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Brianza?
Nothing, thank you.
Ms. Godfrey?
I have no questions. It's essentially the same.
Mr. Collins? Ms. Furrier?
No questions.
Mr. Prabhakar? I don't have any questions either. I just saw a public comment card arrive. I want to make sure it's not for this item. Okay. So this item is up for action, and there's a variety of actions that are recommended, which you can see listed in the item, including approving the revisions, including the filing of financial report and adopting resolution 2018-19.04, and approving the education protection account spending plan for 2017-18. Is there a motion to do all of those things?
I move that we do those things.
I'll second that motion.
Any further discussion? Student board members, preferential vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Board members, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, great. Let's move on then to item 5B, which is the sufficiency of instructional materials resolution number 2018-19.02. Ms. Conaway?
Yes, this item was presented at the last board meeting, and this was really an issue around the 2-meeting rule. So if there are no objections to anything that's listed or any other concerns, there's no additional information to add.
Any comments or questions or a motion?
I move that we approve the resolution 2018-19-0.02, sufficiency of instructional materials.
I'll second.
So that motion has been moved and seconded. Student board members, preferential vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Board members, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution is adopted. Move to item 5C, General Counsel. Dr. Austin?
Yes, this item, again, is essentially an affirmation of previous board action. This was brought back for board consideration again. At our last meeting, we tried to capture some of the key points and just as far as formatting, try to break those points out differently to make them a little more clear. Most importantly, reporting structure that we clearly call out that the General Counsel will report to the Board of Education. we talked about the last meeting, a representation of the relationship with a dotted line with the superintendent, because the person would certainly be doing work with the site staff, although the direct reporting is to the board. We tried to outline each of the daily routine responsibilities. Of course, it could exceed this, but this would certainly keep a general counsel busy. And then we tried to spend a little more time on the two bottom sections, both measurements and goals. And we included the salary range after going through multiple documents. Ms. Hendricks and I landed on the one that looked like it was the most acceptable and had been presented in the past, which is a range of 179.89 to 188.634. And the measurement and goals, a key component here is, although we did not attach a dollar amount, we believe that this should be easily cost neutral to savings. I can add that after the creation of this item, I attended the City Soups Conference in Burlingame and spoke to another superintendent that I have a long-standing relationship with, who said our savings estimates are conservative based on his experience in his school district, and that he went on to rave about the general counsel impact. And the last thing I would add, because I'm not sure we've been explicitly clear about this, is we're talking about an independent general counsel. I just want to check for understanding. We're talking independent from longstanding education firms. So that is what the independence is noting in this piece, is that they are independent from our traditional firms. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Before we have board comments and questions, we'll hear from members of the public. I have two requests, Kathy Jordan and Christopher Boyd. Ms. Jordan?
Thank you. I'd just like to urge the board to approve the general counsel position. Certainly, I would hope that this position would be able to help Palo Alto Unified with compliance, rather than what some people fear would be to assist Palo Alto Unified with evading compliance. On the other hand, I'm optimistic that the general counsel could help to increase compliance. And compliance is cheaper, which could then allow Palo Alto Unified to hopefully reduce its legal expenses and to devote that money towards our children's education. Thank you.
Thank you. Christopher Boyd?
My comments are somewhat drawn on the September 4th board meeting. Between that meeting and this meeting, I pointed out that the board has acted very quickly to spend $2.5 million for purposes that are based on experience, not on change, but on fortification and extension of a system that has been highly prejudicial to the interests of special education kids. I know the board cares very, very deeply, but let's look at an outside observer. The Daily Post had an article in which they interviewed an attorney which represented one of the students that was so injured. His name is Stephen Jaffe. And the article says, the Palo Alto School District is unusual. It conducts itself in interesting ways. The article continues, Jaffe said, they're different than the other public entities that I've dealt with in terms of their, I guess I'd call it, institutional self-confidence. I think that to not address the existing problems that are calling for a new position of deputy superintendent, a new general counsel, and the big legal expenditures like the one we see that was made $1.1 million and approved at the September 4th board meeting, though I understand it was a previous item, Atkinson, Andelson, Loya, and Dennis Wolver Kelly, before we really get to the root cause of all of this, we're going to really not spend money effectively. Hiring a general counsel is a defensive measure when you need a much greater offensive of caring and understanding what is happening to special education students and many other students as well. Title IX cases, IDEA, ADA, IEP, 504. Getting a general counsel in won't solve the problem. It really takes an institutional change, as Mr. Jaffe points out, to get rid of the cause of all the litigation. The secrecy behind the litigation, the secrecy behind the denials of special education requests is very, very sad. I am at a loss to know what to do, so I have submitted
Mr.
a
Boyd.
Brown Act request, which has been denied, of course.
Mr.
and I've
Boyd,
now
can
forwarded
you,
it to the
yes,
state.
you'll have to conclude your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further public comment on this item? If not, then let's turn to board comments and questions. Ms. Godfrey?
Thank you, Mr. Dauber. I find myself in an awkward position because I don't actually want this position at the moment. So let me just reiterate why as briefly as possible. I feel like we are in a different position with the staff that we have, and that we've beefed up our compliance work in the OCR space, and that we've got a deputy superintendent now who is on the details like a bulldog on a pork chop. And we have Dr. Austin, who also has a real details. Why are you people laughing? That's like a thing.
I'm not good on details, so you don't have to use that metaphor on me.
Okay, sorry. But I would say, if we want to consider this again, that I would love to be able to just spend a year using our new staff and the way I think they're prepared to work, managing our law firms, managing the work that's happening here, now that we have a compliance office, and see if we really need a general counsel. And a year from now, if we do, then we go ahead and hire one. The concept that we hire one now, and if a year from now we think we don't need it, that we fire that person because they're only on a one-year contract, feels a little inhumane to me. I would rather try and work with the resources we have. If that is not agreeable to my colleagues, it wasn't 2 weeks ago, but if it's not agreeable to my colleagues, I would like to revisit the description of the job. The legal budget for the year is 1.2 million, and 3/4 of it is related to special ed. And so if we think what we might want to do is save some money in the special ed space, we might want to have someone who has a little more experience there, so that when those questions first arise, we can take care of them in-house. You know, in the last couple of years, we've been out of balance on what this budget looks like now, because we've had so many things related to our resolution agreement with OCR and investigations last year that really spiked our spending. And now we look like we're on a more normal year, but still the special education piece is 3/4 of it, because that's complicated work. And if we consider hiring a general counsel, maybe we should consider somebody who can be our sort of first look at that before we go out to our firms. Anyway, that is my suggestion. I'm happy to hear what my colleagues have to say.
Mr. Collins?
No questions or comments. I'm prepared to support the proposal.
Ms. Bain-Caswell?
I think that's an interesting proposal, Ms. Godfrey. This is a question I brought up to the superintendent since we got the packet, because I do think special ed is a big part of what we're, it's the biggest part of what we're spending. And I would like us to think about using resources so that we're looking at that and helping to shape how we're spending money on that. I really like, Dr. Austin, that you added some measurements and goals to this. Thank you very much for doing that. You know, the last one, periodic recommendations regarding things, at a minimum, I'd like to see special ed in there. And I just want to call this, this last metric to my colleagues' attention. Produce periodic recommendations regarding investigations, OCR, Title IX, and I really feel like special ed almost should be in the front of that. So I would, if you wanted to turn that into a motion, Ms. Godfrey, but before, well, I guess you have to wait your turn on that. Maybe I'll turn that into a motion, but before that, I want to talk about BP 9124. BP 9124 is our board policy on how we work with council. And right now, it says only the president and the board would be able to consult with council. If we had an internal council, I would suggest that we change that. Because a part of having an internal council would be that board members could ask questions. And if all questions, because of the Brown Act, we couldn't really have all questions go through the board president anyway. Had you thought about that, or?
Couple things. First of all, when there are legal questions from an individual board member that there might be an interest in with the entire board, those go through me and I go to the attorney, and then we can disseminate those out. So what we may have here is a protocol question, and we may have a board policy question. And I think there's probably two approaches to that. I think it's completely solvable, but it's definitely worth us solving together instead of getting down the road and being unhappy.
Yeah, I see a potential that we could get down the road and be unhappy, and I'd rather fix this up front. And then I had just a question. You said we have a complaint on Ms. Busman. Who is that person? Or at least it's in the
That is our
report.
deputy superintendent, Ms. Hendricks, who is now the official first stop on complaints. She's very excited about that work. And I can tell you that already I've watched her help shepherd people through the process and get them to the appropriate person.
I think that's great that that's been formally done. Probably we should let people know that we have an ombudsman in it and who it is. Okay. I'm going to wait till it goes around before I try to make my suggestion and Ms. Godfrey's suggestion into a motion. I hear what other people have to say here.
I'm happy to place that BP on the matrix, on our BPRC matrix, add it in there and talk about when we might look at it again based on the action that we may take tonight or in the future. I also considered, given that $900,000 is budgeted for AALRR out of our 1.2, it seemed, although because, I mean, I've only been around for left fewer than 2 years, but it seems as though this relationship with AALRR right now is quite good, that they are, or at least the lawyer that we've mostly seen seems to be attentive and knowledgeable and work well with our staff. So given that seem to be starting to get into a groove there, I actually like the idea of a general counsel, but one who can stay again on top of those legal bills and whatnot, as well as the general work. So while I think it was a reasonable thing to consider, although I landed on a not specifying that, given our current relationship with ALRR. That's it. I'm ready to support this.
Mr. Prabhakar?
Nothing to say.
Ms. Furrier?
No comment.
I'm ready to go ahead with this too. I'm really pleased to be in the position to go ahead with it. I agree with Ms. DeBrienza that I think it's not, given how I see how our special ed work is being handled and the kind of variety of other things, I'm happy to not have the general counsel have to specialize in that area, although I see the point that Ms. Godfrey is making. And I think that the issues that Ms. Baton-Caswell is raising about sort of the protocols around communication are well worth talking about, but we can do that, we can kind of accelerate that discussion in BPRC and bring back something, I think, probably well in advance of when general counsel would actually start. So I think those are well worth considering. So I'm prepared to go ahead. Is there a motion that we can start to consider?
I'd like to make a motion. While I appreciate that our relationship with our special ed firm is good and they do great work, I can also appreciate that us doing sort of the initial screening or the initial look at things would not affect our relationship adversely with them. I would think that they might actually even appreciate having someone in-house that had some of that expertise to know how to craft the question going to them. So I would like to move that we add a requirement to the job posting that the general counsel come with some special education experience.
I would second that. Can I add something onto it, or do I have to wait till?
Yeah, you'll have to wait.
Amend
So
it.
I'm gonna take your motion as a motion to approve the recommendation with that addition to the job description.
that
Is that
amendment,
right?
yes.
Okay, and are you comfortable seconding that?
I'm comfortable seconding that.
Okay, and is there a discussion?
Yeah,
Collins?
I agree with the motion to approve the thing, though I think it's nice of Ms. Godfrey to make it, given that she's going to vote against it. I don't agree with that as a requirement. I think when hiring a person like this, you should hire the best person you could find. And while I don't know if we have a category of nice to have, some familiarity with special education law, I think maybe would be nice to have. But in my mind, we're hiring a general counsel, not a specialist, and we're hiring a person who we hope will serve us through thick and thin and whatever comes up. And we have, history has, our last 10 years have shown us we reliably cannot predict what's going to come up. And so that's why I'd say just hire the best person that you can find, regardless of their particular experience. The best education general counsel I spoke to when I was calling around the state a year ago trying to figure out what these people did was a guy who was an ex-SEC lawyer who followed his wife out here and took a job as the general counsel at Alameda, I think, and had never practiced education law before. And he had a better perspective about his job and what he did for that district than any dyed-in-the-wool education lawyer was likely to have. So I just thought, that, in my mind, that's the model, just hire the best person you can find. But I'd be more than welcome to see that as a nice-to-have on the thing as opposed to a requirement.
So let me move to help move us forward. I'm going to move to amend Ms. Godfrey's motion to strike the reference to the special education competency.
Second.
Okay, is there further discussion on that amendment?
I think I agree with Mr. Collins that I think it's a nice to have, and yet it's a general counsel, and I don't want us to not look at a potentially great candidate because that hasn't been their specialty. Hopefully there's someone that will be competent in that introductory level work regardless.
Can I make a suggestion? What is it called that I'm supposed to do if I'm?
So you can amend the amendment.
I would like to amend the amendment. Okay. I would like on the metrics, the last one, produce periodic recommendations regarding investigations, OCR, Title IX, and special ed.
So what I suggest you do is I don't actually believe that's an amendment to the amendment that I just made. So what I I suggest that we resolve this amendment and then immediately take up your amendment, which I think is to a different part of the job description. Is that right? I think it'll be cleaner.
Sure, we can do it that way, but I don't really think it's a different part of the job description. I think I'm trying to get to this in a
I
different
understand.
way.
I think it'll be cleaner this way. It'll leave us less
It's
likely
fine.
to have troubles later.
Be clear that I know what we're voting on, so.
Okay, so what we're voting on now, so here's this, Ms. Godfrey, you made a motion to approve this hiring, but with the addition of the special education language that you proposed. I moved that we amend that by striking that reference to the special education so that the motion would simply approve the position. Any further discussions? Is everyone clear what we're voting on? We're voting on that amendment. Student board members?
Wait,
Voting
but
on
if,
removing that amendment?
No, we're voting on the amendment that removes the reference to the special education.
okay, but,
Then we'll take up your amendment, which
Okay.
I think is about metrics.
yes, but are we voting to approve the recommendation?
No, not yet.
Okay, thank
Not
you.
yet. Not
Just
yet.
the amendment,
Just the
okay.
amendment.
The amendment to remove the reference to special
Okay,
ed.
I got it.
It would be,
California
it'd be really
proposition.
useful to have a visual aid at some point, but we're not there yet. We got to crawl before we can walk. Do y'all understand what we're voting on? Okay. Student board members, preferential vote.
Aye.
Abstain.
So that's 1 aye and 1 abstention. Board members, all in favor on this amendment? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
No.
So the amendment passes by a vote of 3 to 2. So the motion now is simply to approve the general counsel. Ms. Baton-Caswell made an amendment. Do you want to restate that so that we know?
My amendment is that the measurement and goals, the last measurement and goals, is to produce periodic recommendations regarding investigations, OCR, Title IX, and special ed.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion?
So that's not in the job description itself, right? It's in this recommendation.
That
It's
is
in measurements
true,
and-
but it would be what we expect this
Yes,
person to
okay.
do.
I just want to make sure that I'm looking at the right
So,
page.
a question? Sorry?
Is it the nice to have thing?
It's a nice to have thing, I think. Well,
No, it's not.
it
It's
talks
part
about-
of how we would measure
Right.
this person.
It's part of their job responsibilities.
So just to clarify, I mean, special ed is a big department that's run by another person. So do we want to maybe add some specificity? Do you want to say special ed legal
I'm sorry,
issues, or-
special ed legal issues. I assume that all the periodic recommendations are around legal,
Yeah, I know.
because this is, the person is general counsel. But we can say that.
Right. Okay, so we'll take your amendment to be to add special education legal issues to the list of reporting. Okay. Okay, is there any further discussion on that? Okay, student board members, preferential vote.
Aye.
Board members, all in favor of that amendment?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So the motion is amended to add that language around metrics. Is there any further amendments or discussion? Okay, student board members, preferential vote?
Aye.
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 Board members, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Abstain.
So the motion passes by a vote of 4 to 0 with 1 abstention.
Do
Okay.
we need to, do I need to make a motion about board policy 9124? I mean, I think that's what we said. We were always going to make motions if we want something done, or else it won't get written in the minutes.
Perfectly reasonable,
Why
yeah.
don't you make a motion?
Okay, so
Matrix to review.
I make a motion that board policy 9124 is revised to make sure that there's a way the process for consulting with council is adapted so it will work with for the whole board.
So I think that what I take that to mean is that you want the BPRC to consider the question and to come back with a recommendation for a change to 9124, is that right?
Yes, and come back to the board with it.
Okay.
I'd like it to be in the minutes so
Second.
that we can follow it.
Any discussion? Student board members, preferential vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Board members, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So Ms. Baton-Caswell's motion passes. Any further discussion on this item? Okay, let's move then to, let me see where we are. Well, let's see, we actually need to go back to, well, let me take the question of, let me just take a minute to look at our consent, because we pulled 2 other items from the consent agenda. So I think the right thing to do is to add them, is to do them now, because these are action items. So let's take item 3C, which is the approval of the minutes for the September 4th regular board meeting. I think, Ms. Baton-Caswell, you pulled that item. Do you want to comment on it?
Yes. So there is a place, oh gosh, there was an edit that needed to go in. There was a 3-2 vote, and only 2 board members were listed on that 3-2 vote. Okay, it was motion number 12 under general counsel. Motion number 12, the motion failed by a vote of 3-2, and it says with Godfrey and Baton-Caswell dissenting. Since it was moved by Collins and seconded by Dauber, that means the other dissension was DeBranza, so that needs to be corrected.
Well, can we hang on just a second? We have disagreement on that. After reviewing the video on that, we went to the videotape.
Oh, good, okay.
It failed.
Right. She was actually in favor, but it failed because it failed to meet the
Supermajority.
the supermajority
Oh,
requirement.
supermajority, okay, then that needs to be noted here.
Okay, so we're not adding DeBranza, but we're going to note that it failed to reach supermajority. Vicki, do you have that?
Well, so we're going to, I believe we need to, oh, I see what you're saying. We don't, yeah, we don't list, yeah, I think that's right. We need to just say that it failed by a vote of 3-2, and maybe we can say with a supermajority requirement after the 3-2, so it makes it clear why it failed, even though it had a majority.
We can do that.
Does that make sense?
I think as long as we note what happened here so that we can track it, someone goes back, gets confused, like I did. So on the board operations, oh gosh, did I forget this? Yes, and I did not. I would like to make my comments a little clearer. I went back and watched the tape on those to make sure that what I thought I said, I actually said. And I spoke about legislation AB 1951. I repeated a community request that the superintendent's Friday weekly message go out to parents via email. I asked how the board can better discuss and address legislation, and asked for regular donation reports to be brought to the board as is done by other districts. And I have it in writing here. I'd like to move that we make those changes, and I'll give the written, if it passes, give the written part to the to our minutes writer. So that's my motion, that those changes be made.
Okay, so I think, as I understand it, so the minutes would be revised to add, I'm going to say the phrase, with a supermajority requirement after 3-2 on motion number 12, to make that clear, and then to incorporate the revised text that Ms. Baton-Caswell has. Is that right?
That would be my motion. Thank you.
Okay, I'll second that. Any discussion? Student board members, preferential vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Board members, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that motion passes. And then the next item that was pulled was,
Do we have to approve the minutes, or did we just do the minutes?
we
and
just
the
approved,
amend-
I think we
approving
just
those
approved the minutes. I think the motion was to approve the minutes with those changes.
With those
Yeah.
changes.
Thank you.
And then next is the authorization to increase the legal contract amount for Goldfarb and Lippman. Ms. Baton-Caswell, I think you pulled that as well. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, I pulled it for 2 reasons. The first is I'd like to move that we approve it with the instruction that if it looks like we're going above the $30,000 number, it comes back to the board.
Okay, is there a second part of that? So that's so you're moving to approve with that instruction to staff?
Yeah, and then I have a clarification. Do you want me to do the clarification first? That does not need to be approved.
Why don't we go ahead and vote on that
Okay.
motion?
Second.
Any comments or questions? Student board members, preferential vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Board members, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
The motion passes by a vote of 4-1 with Mr. Collins dissenting. And then you had a,
Yeah, it was brought to my attention that the letter that's in here is different than the letter that was in the board packet on the 4th of September, and they have the same dates. So I just want the superintendent to just have the opportunity to just explain that they're different letters, and however you want to explain that, since it wasn't explained.
Yeah, I didn't have that question leading to the meeting, so I honestly have not reviewed that. So that might take me a few minutes.
Can you pursue this with the superintendent after? Or is
Yeah,
this-
I just want to note that it is that there's a couple of lines that are different in this copy of the letter than the one that was on September 4th. And Dr. Austin, I think you did mention to me why you wanted that changed. So this is just a different version of the letter because you asked for a different proposal?
Yeah, if you can you point me right to that section? I know exactly what you're talking about. I just want to be able to look at it.
It is the consent item for the September 4th, meeting that you pulled. We didn't do it on consent at September 4th. You said you were pulling it and you were going to have it at this meeting. So it's a consent, it was on the consent calendar for this meeting, but the letter was slightly changed.
So Ms. Bain-Caswell, if you know the reason why it was changed, maybe you can say it, and then maybe that might help Dr. Austin.
Well, I'd asked Dr. Austin, and he said that he wanted to make sure it better represented what we were doing.
Yeah, so
if you would just say that, just because I have had some questions about why they had the same date on them.
yeah, the first letter, I'm just trying to, this is really hard to do on the fly. In fact, it's a terrible
Can I ask
practice
a question while
for me.
you're
Yes.
doing that? I won't ask you, I'll ask somebody else that's related.
So I'm going to ask actually that we just defer this question and answer to board operations.
Okay, that's fine.
And then that'll give Dr. Austin a chance to formulate his thoughts without having to do it on the fly, which does seem like a potentially fraught idea.
And just
I
to
have
Ms. Bain-Caswell quickly, I'm not trying to make this hard. I'm just struggling to find it, and I don't want to speak off the top of my head on it.
Okay. I have an unrelated question on the same item. This is for Dr. Novak. In section 7A, you're going to show us our legal spending year-to-date and our budget. I assume going forward, so just confirm this for me, that you'll add another column that is kind of updated budget so we can track how the budget's changing?
I can do that. I was just planning on, so specifically for this item, since it's currently at 20, I was just, if it got approved, I would have changed that number to 30. But if you want to have an original budget and a current budget, I can,
Just a little.
we're creating this on the fly, so I can add that column if that's what the board would like.
The itch I'm trying to scratch is
got
just understanding how the budget creeps, because the budget
And it
has
may.
in prior years creeped.
Yep.
And so a little audit trail at the bottom is good,
Very good.
or a separate column, whatever it is that works for you, that just helps us understand how the budget has changed throughout the year.
We will
Because
do
there's
that.
original budget, and then by the end of the year, it's some other number.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, are we done with this item then?
I'm fine bringing it back for board operations.
Okay, so just to be clear, we approved the change, we approved the change, and now we're just going to have a brief discussion in board operations about the clarification. Okay, so let's move on then to the first of our discussion items, which is 6A regarding Brianna's lease. Dr. Golton.
Well, you have before you the renewal of the Brianna's lease. The original agreement was a 1967 agreement, which expired in 50 years after that in 2017. The big objectives here were to, one, put this formally in the form of a lease as opposed to a partnership agreement, and so that's happened here. A second objective was to, the original proposal was to have another 50-year extension, and no, we didn't want to do that. And so the compromise was a 10-year lease. However, the lease, the renewal starts a year ago, so it's in effect a 9-year lease, so that's good. Secondly, we agreed with the county that we would do $1 a year, and so we're doing $1 a year. It still is that partnership. It should be clearly stated that while we want to sort of retain this flexibility, it will be quite jarring, to put it mildly, if at some point in the future we unilaterally decide to remove these orthopedically handicapped services, particularly because it services some of our own children, services children in northern Santa Clara County. Other than that, you have a kind of a standard long-form lease, typical of the I guess what we agreed. The inspection of premises, it says in the event of emergency, district will attempt to provide county reasonable advance notice. County shall permit its district and its agents to enter during county office hours, provided the district will provide reasonable advance notice. The reality is this is an agreement between us and the county of Santa Clara. Our relationship in the past, and we don't expect it to change, is we simply, they let us know there's a problem and we walk in. And in fact, even if there isn't a problem, we ask them how's everything, and because we know the staff, and then if we want to look at something, we look at it. But again, this is the formal lease. So we're recommending that this lease be approved.
Okay, so this is up for discussion this evening and then action at the next meeting. Are there any comments or questions from board members?
While I will miss the Courier font of the 1967 very long lease agreement that we had before, this all looks good to me. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I see it's noticed as action. Is that, have we discussed it some other time?
I thought we had, because I thought I had asked the question of, can we break this lease if we needed to?
This has not been discussed.
That's interesting. I'm the property committee, so that's probably
Yeah,
where
you
I've heard
might, you might have heard it elsewhere, but it has not been discussed
In
here.
open session.
I hadn't noticed that.
All
It's
right.
in the discussion.
I'll be ready to support it when it comes back.
Okay, so I thought I had asked this question, but maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm imagining it. Can we break this lease if we had to?
No.
Okay.
Our real property leases for Fremont Hills and for Garland call for us to be able to, in the case of Fremont Hills, it's a 4-year lease. It's a 4-year arrangement. In other words, you can give 4 years' notice. There is no such provision in this one.
So you're not concerned about that because we have provisions in other leases?
This is a different sort of lease. The lease with Fremont Hills is actually for a lot more money, and it's with a private school. The lease at Garland is the same way. This, again, what I'm saying is that it would be quite a jarring event if we turned around and said, we want you out of there in a year or 2 years.
Yeah, I guess my question is just different. You feel like we have enough other space in case we had a need in the next 10 years?
Yes,
I do. Okay, that's what I was trying to understand. Thank you.
Any other, it's a little disappointing that you weren't able to get the rent raised 50 years later from $1 a year, Dr. Galton. But I'll leave it at that.
Actually, I'll do that calculation. I wonder what it would have been.
I think it's
leave
declined
it to
in real
Dr.
value,
Novak.
obviously.
Yes.
Okay, any
Yes.
other comments or questions?
Is this something we can bring back on consent?
Yeah, I would suggest that we bring it back on consent. Okay, so let's move to item 6B regarding services at Addison and Hoover. This is Dr. Galton as well?
Yes, it is. These are small adjustments that are needed to the architect contracts at Addison and at Hoover. At Addison, because of the design of the AKC portables and because of landscaping issues that actually relate to the Magical Bridge playground facility. For Hoover, we're at the, let's see, we're, I hate to say, at the mercy of, yeah, but it's true, we're at the mercy of DSA. And so they're requiring 2 areas that we weren't providing fire sprinklers for to be designed in. And in addition, and more importantly, they're requiring a structural review for the building addition that we're doing. Their position is the original structure be modified by more than 10%, and this triggers an instructional review. We take issue with it, but the fact remains DSA is not only a player, but they're also the umpire.
Okay, are there comments or questions on this item? This item will also come back for action at the next meeting, and I would say on consent as well, unless something comes up.
I have a quick question. I'm hoping you can help me understand, and it just might be me being confused about it, but having to move the AKC portables, what, didn't we know ahead of time where they should, did they go in the wrong place and now we have to move them?
No,
I didn't really understand when I read it, why we were now moving them.
Oh, okay. They aren't being moved. That is, we're leasing new portables. Those AKC portables were over 20 years old, and we estimated that they wouldn't stand a move. Then, incidentally, they're bigger because whereas originally we have a 960 and a 1440, now we have two 1440s. Why? Because once you move them, and again, we needed to do that, they're in the path of the expanded multi-purpose building. But once you agree to move them, then all of a sudden, they have to be recertified under current standards as opposed to historical standards. It's the same thing that we've faced, for instance, some of our other buildings. Once you, just as long as you leave things alone, it's good. But once you do something like get in and renovate a building, then you've got a lot of other codes that need to be met. Their inspectors come in. So at any rate, so there was that. And then in this particular movement, we required these portables in a reasonable amount of time, and the portable vendor changed. So that's it. And by the way, the board previously approved this.
Thank you. I have no other questions.
Okay, any further comments or questions? Okay, so we'll bring this back on consent. Thank you. For the next, at the next meeting. The next item is 6C, the approval of, discussion about the approval of BP 3311 bids. Dr. Austin, who would you like to speak on this one?
Well, our intent is to tell you that items C through F are essentially what most districts would call a first read. And if there are questions, we can entertain those now. And if not, we would bring these back on consent at our next meeting.
See all the BPs?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And let me just say that F got a lot of attention.
Yeah, so maybe what we want to do is, if this is agreeable, if there's any questions about C, D, or E, we can just raise them. Otherwise, they'll come back on consent. And then F is the board policy on suicide prevention, and that I think we'll want to take as a separate item.
So I have one question on C.
Go ahead.
Go ahead?
No, sure, yeah.
I just was wondering if there are any rules about public schools having to use union labor. I'm not sure who to address that to. Dr. Austin.
Well, I'm looking around the room. Dr. Novak looks like our best shot.
Dr. Galton?
We can bring in Bob Galton.
Dr. Galton
I don't
knows
think
the
there's anybody
answer.
else back there, so it's going to have to be you.
We're going to start working our way forward. Barbara, get ready, you're next, if Bob doesn't have this.
Actually, Jim could have answered this, but the fact remains there are serious, incredibly serious prevailing wage rules that apply to public entities. And these payroll records are the contractors' payroll records are routinely acquired by virtue of public records requests of the school districts, and we're no exception.
So does that doesn't mean we have to use unionized labor, it just means we have to pay the
Correct,
wage?
but we have to pay prevailing wage.
Okay, and it doesn't say so in the board policy, but because it's ed code or law, it doesn't have to say it?
Yeah, I mean, we could say it, but these are, where's Comey? These are, but I mean, you just say it. This is recommended to us by CSBA, so it's like.
Okay, well, law overrides board policy, I guess, so, okay.
Well, yeah, actually, I guess one of the, not concerns, but whole bunches of things that are in these CSBA recommendations, of course, we're doing them because they're required by the ed code or the public contracts code or whatever.
Okay.
So these are, on these items, these are by and large CSBA recommended updates.
I have a question on food service. So I seem to recall years ago, we were hundreds of thousands of dollars in the red in food service. And I assume that's when this word self-supporting got in here on the first page of the BP. So in BPRC, what was the discussion about taking that out?
I believe, if I recall, that we thought while that is a goal, there might be other priorities for student well-being that might make us decide that it is worth us spending some of our budget on this area if the need arose and we wanted that flexibility.
Did you happen to know if we were in the red currently? Do you know? I know, I'm sorry, Dr. Novak, I know this is probably not top of your list to know.
We're about break even in terms of
Okay.
our food service program. We're pretty right at.
Looks like Ms. Vishakon has an answer. Are you heading to the lectern? Okay, okay. Okay, so this was not holding us to this as a standard in our BP, but as a goal?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So I'm just confused with the difference between nonprofit and self-supporting. I mean, what's the definition difference that you saw there?
I believe Mr. Dober made a comment in relation to this. Self-supporting could also mean that we produce our own vegetables and fruits and things like that, and we will not be able to self-support in that sense. So,
I'm not sure I said that. That would be an interesting. Yeah, I think
it was one of the schools. One of the schools has
we've got a
means
couple
of producing their own.
Oh, okay, I don't think
items.
that language has ever meant that. I think it always meant financial self-supporting. So
Yeah,
that's why you changed it?
So it would be great if our schools grew their own food.
Exactly. Gotta get on that.
But no, that's what I had in mind was that the two words here, nonprofit, meaning we are not expecting our food service program to return revenues to the district. Self-supporting, the comment that I made, which is reflected here, is that there, at least from my perspective, there's no particular reason to require that this program be self-supporting. And if the board decides to invest some dollars in, better food because we think that it has a positive learning advantage, then, the board should be able to do that without contradicting board policy.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you mean by nonprofit, if the board decided to move some money from one account to this account and still not have food services make money, then it would be nonprofit?
Yeah, I mean, so it's self-supporting. So if it would permit the program to cost money if the board, if we decided that it was, if we so choose, right?
Okay, that's fine. I understand now.
I'm sorry for misrepresenting.
No, it's a great
Mr.
idea.
Dover. I'm
I
so
wish I had had
sorry.
it myself, but.
Yes.
But we are using some of the food grown at JLS in our food services, and there's talk of trying to partner that with Ohlone as well.
But the reason for that isn't so that you break even.
No, it's not to say no.
Yeah.
It's to be a little bit greener.
That's an idea for Coverly, actually. We could farm it.
Is that a non-negotiable for
I'm
Coverly?
not going to go there. Is there any further comments or questions on items C, D, and E? Otherwise, they will return on consent at our next meeting. Okay, so let's go then to item F, which is BP 5141.52 suicide prevention. And Dr. Austin?
Well, I was going to make a editorial comment. Having attended the meeting, I think the care that went into this item was the highest level. I thought some of the conversations around this work was thoughtful and time invested. And I know from speaking with at least one of our student board reps, she had noticed this topic as well as is important and meaningful work. So I think while there's always an eyebrow raised when you see a topic this serious in a policy, the time that went into it reflects care of not only students in crisis, but of best practices that keep us out of making bad situations worse. And I think that that's really worth pointing out going into this topic.
Thank you, Dr. Austin.
I just want to note that Ms. Stevenson and her team
Absolutely.
and Ms. Ofek put a lot of energy into really helping us all understand best practices, what current thinking is and why. And it got our attention for many, many VPRC meetings.
You know, I'll just add to one specific part of the policy where it talks about memorialization. It's almost counterintuitive. In crisis, people want to help people feel better about what happened, but that's in conflict with the research. And I think that I think the committee's time in learning about this and having an open mind really landed us in a good place. And having been a principal, unfortunately, that's had to deal with some of this, absent a policy, decisions are made in pure emotion. And that's why we have policies. And I think this is an absolute great example of why policy work proactively is going to lead to better outcomes for us, absent policy in the middle of emotional events.
Okay, any comments or questions? Ms. Baton-Caswell, you're.
Yeah, I have to say that one of the things we really struggled with in our two clusters was both what the postvention should be and what the memorialization should be, and having it documented. This is not, I mean, I looked at all the things all the work that was done, I mean, back to Nurse Linda Lenoir and her group, and this reflects a lot of the recommendations that came from the Project Safety Net. It's nice to see it written down somewhere, because I know I get questions from parents about this too. You know, this happened and how can we do the memorialization? And I think if we can all point to the same steps, we're going to do a much better job. I know that Ms. Godfrey was very involved with Project Safety Net's recommendations around this and did quite a bit of training, but having it documented allows us to remember it.
Ms. DeBrienza, did you have more comments? Ms. Godfrey?
And I assume, and I could have sworn I saw it in here somewhere, that this was a derivative of the work done for the toolkit that exists. that was created here in PAUSD and I think is used at the state level now. I assume, I'm going to look at you, Sharon, not sure who to look at, that this, the toolkit may be the basis of this, although this may be a derivative of
Well,
it.
I wouldn't say it's the basis of this work, because Miriam did a wonderful job looking at multiple resources and talking directly with experts in the field, and aligning as best as possible with CSBA. So I wouldn't say that there was one source, but there was definitely some attention to identifying the most credible sources.
Okay, so let me ask it a different way. Does this directly contradict what's in our existing toolkit?
It does not contradict it. I think a different level of thought has gone into this work that you may not find in the toolkit.
Okay, that's the question I'm asking. I just want to make sure it doesn't contradict the work we already have. Thank you. Yes, and thank you for getting to this, BPRC. I know this is a hard one.
I want to thank Ms. Conaway, too. I left you out there.
You know, I just want to say, I think that CSBA got a lot of their stuff from our toolkit.
Yeah. I think there's a lot in here that came from CSBA that come from us.
Yeah.
So.
Well, just to let you know, our work has far expanded CSBA. We built in some requirements that CSBA didn't even consider around training and professional development of our staff. So I think we did a better job.
Mr. Collins, any? Ms. Furrier, any comments or questions? Mr. Babakar? I came on to BPRC, I came midway through the consideration of this, and I really want to underline that the discussion and work that went into this was really extraordinary. And Ms. Stevenson, came back over and over again with feedback from BPRC, circulating it among mental health professionals. So I think the staff work on this was really critical, and we made some quite significant changes. So for example, kind of lifting up the requests for memorialization to the district level from the school site level because of a concern about whether school site staff would be really in a position to make those decisions at a moment of crisis in their school communities. So I think this work is really important. I think it's potentially life-saving, if we have to find ourselves in a situation like this again. And I really appreciate the work of staff and the community in coming together around this.
I have one question that I just thought of. We have had some requests over time about diplomas. Did you consider that at all in your discussions? Or is that
I
a
don't
sort
remember
of
the
one-off
topic of
kind of
diplomas
thing?
coming up. Do you remember diplomas being discussed? No.
I mean, it certainly could be a one-off thing, but
Well, we've actually had that conversation with respect to the hospital school, and our hospital school has led an organization across the state to talk about all kinds of issues between kids going to high schools and hospital schools and into districts, and that is a question that comes up there. Is what happens if you have a kid who's critically ill and is deceased by the time they would have graduated. So that might be where you've heard it. I haven't heard it in
I
this
have
context
heard, I
as
have
much.
heard it in this context. We have had discussions about it in this context where families have asked about it. So I would recommend that we have some sort of guidance in here about that.
Can I chime in? I believe there's a different board policy that addresses that exact question.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what it is off the top of my head, though.
Can we check on that? I
Yeah.
just think that this is something that has come up, and if we're going to go into this level of detail, it would be good guidance for our staff.
Dr. Austin, can you check into that and circulate that to us?
And just to let you know, those conversations are happening internally, pretty much around the conversations around memorializations and the impact that the particular recognitions during that time may have on others. So it's certainly split in terms of the opinions on how that should be. So
Yeah, we've had some families request for themselves, not a public ceremony of any kind. So I just think we need to have some sort of policy on that.
Okay, so Dr. Austin is going to just find an answer and circulate it probably in his superintendent's report, I would say. Any further discussion on this topic? So all of these discussion items will appear on the consent calendar for our next meeting. So let's move then to information items, and first to item 7A, which is the 2018-19 enrollment report and class size summary. Oh, did I make a mistake? Sorry. Oh, okay. Dr. Austin.
Yeah. Before we get to the actual item, this is one of those places where I'd like to point to a change in the structure of the agenda. This came from our study session where we had discussed having some items come to you in the form of reports, whether that's white papers or data reports. In this particular case, you'll see two of those items. One fits, I would say item B is a total natural for this. The other A, we honestly had some discussion about it. Where should this one fit? So it sits here tonight, and be interested in feedback on the back end. The main factor that puts something under information items, so in this category, is that there is no presentation. That the expectation would be that the board has read these items, reviewed them, and may ask questions, add comments. Now, specifically on item A, I can tell you as a new superintendent to this school district, this is a report that is not common, and it is not something I've come across. So it doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's not a place where I have experience going through this. And I can also tell you on behalf of the staff that the purpose at one point may have been clearly defined. In the eyes of the staff, it is not as clearly defined. So that's just to say that tonight I've asked our staff, including me, to take notes on what the purpose is if we choose to discuss this topic and what they'd like to see in a report. Because I can tell you the amount of time that goes into the report may or may not align with the impact that the report has. So we want to make sure those two things align to the best of our ability. So I'll stop right there.
Okay, so we have one card for public comment. Kathy Jordan. Ms. Jordan, if you want to come up to the podium, you'll have an opportunity to comment. And as usual, if anybody else would like to comment, then they can fill out a card and we will call you.
I just wanted to bring up a couple of things. I noted that in the enrollment that it had declined by 292 students, 2.4%, while the projection was for an additional 38 students. So I guess my question was related to the budget as well as the enrollment. What adjustments are going to be made since we have 292 fewer students? Are there going to be some adjustments that will be made in terms of class size reduction, or are there benefits to our student? Will the budget be reduced? Will there be some action taken related to that? Also, I wanted to highlight something and ask a question, if I might. It's on page 9. It's a table. I think this whole enrollment report has got a lot of interesting data in it. I haven't had a chance to sift through all of it, but looks like there's a lot of good, interesting data. And on page 9, it's the 10-year elementary enrollment by attendance area. And I noticed that under non-residents, it notes Tinsley, for example, and then it says out of district. If you look at the rest of the 10-year elementary enrollment, you have the 1-year change, 5-year change, 10-year change. Generally, you're seeing negative numbers. So it looks as though there's been decline over time, except for the out of district, in which you see mammoth increases. What does that represent? Who comprises out of district? And what is out of district aside from Tinsley? I don't see this referred anywhere else or explained, and I see a 40% increase and an 87% increase, 5 years, 40%, 10-year, 87% increase in out of district, 6% in the 1-year change. Everything else I see is, except for Nixon, looks like is negative. So I just think that's something interesting to learn about. I would like to know more about the composition of that group, particularly since it's out of district. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jordan. Dr. Austin, do you want to comment on that question?
Yeah, actually I would. That was a question that was raised by a board member in preparation for today's meeting, and after having our preparation meeting, we discovered that out of district includes students of staff members, and that over this 10-year period of time, there's been a dramatic increase in the number of staff members who have made the choice to bring their kids to our school district, and we verified those numbers, and we think that's actually a very healthy trend and a measurement of working conditions that's a benefit to our employees, and we're happy that they see the value and want to bring their own children here as well.
Thank you. Okay, so this is an opportunity for comments and questions. If you have any on this report, as Dr. Austin said, there won't be any staff presentation. Mr. Collins?
I have several comments, and I don't, maybe a question. First comment is, I do think, I'm glad that we skipped the presentation, because the presentation just usually repackages stuff that's in the tables and not that useful. Though I personally have seen that presentation going back more than 20 years. So it's a longstanding archival item. The second thing is, I do think, well, it sounds like you haven't seen this report. I think this report is fundamental. Maybe it's because I spent 9 hard months working on the EMAC committee and now bleed enrollment data. But I can tell you, in the context of doing that and trying to understand our district's long-term enrollment trends, enrollment data going back to 1960, which is the latest that I went back, and I think probably more were available, that's just as far back as I asked, was fundamental. And so particularly tables 1 through 4 and 8, which I think are all part of the multi-decade time series, are things that I don't think under any circumstances we should lose. Those represent basic census data about our kids and where do they go to school and what grades they're in and their demographic ethnic profile. And I think we will always want to know that, and knowing it over long periods of time is extremely valuable for capacity planning, which is one of the hardest jobs I think we do. You miss the 10 years during which Ms. Baden-Caswell's nodding because she was sitting at the same seat for much of that time, where the #1 question in Palo Alto schools was, should we build a 13th elementary school? How many task force? 3, 4?
Yeah, at least.
So having that data, I think, it's awfully important. The data on and the data on tables 5 through 7, I think, is mostly geared exactly to that problem, and is less important when we're stable and shrinking, as we have been the last few years. But if we started growing again, as I think we all are aware that we may well, it's not within our control. It's really depends on what happens with housing builds. That will very quickly become a very hot topic, the hot topic. And I think having this data in time series fashion is well worth the effort. And I know that a lot of effort has gone into this, and in the last couple of years, we've seen this report really last year and this year now, have seen this really cleaned up thanks to some of the staff that have taken it on. And I think it's really appreciated, because I think that having reliable numbers on this is really important to doing our job well. I only have a couple of observations. One is I may make a motion on this depending on Dr. Austin's reaction. We presented several of the tables, actually it's only 2 or 3, that show 3 areas, or clusters I think we call them, north, south, and west. And per the EMAC unanimous recommendation, and you can remember there wasn't much unanimous about the EMAC, but this was a unanimous recommendation from the EMAC, that instead of analyzing 3 clusters, we go to 4 quadrants, because the relationship between Juana Briones and Barron Park on the one hand, and Escondido and Nixon on the other hand, is chalk and cheese. And they are clumped together as those places west of El Camino, and just called the Western. And that impacts things like how we think the parts of the district are growing. It impacts school overflow considerations because we prioritize overflows within cluster. But the idea that someone would be overflowed from Barron Park, Buona Brioni School to Nixon School, I can tell you that parent would not be a happy parent. But as opposed to Addison to Hayes, where they're like, it's down the block. I'm sure Addison and Hayes parents have steam coming out of their ears right now. But I do think it is really important to understand our district correctly, that we cast the way we format our numbers.
Make a motion, I'll second it.
Okay, so I move that we direct staff to, in the future, I don't think it's necessary for this year, to recast the analysis in 4 quadrants instead of 3 clusters.
Second.
A couple of other observations. Do you want me to just continue?
And then we can take up your motion after you're done speaking.
As kinder enrollment goes, there's a lot of attention to the headline number, like how the overall district enrollment went up, went down. The thing I think one of the things we learned on the EMAC is, as kindergarten goes, so goes the nation. You can very accurately predict the enrollment of the district 10 years from now based on the kindergarten enrollment this year. And so we learned to pay a lot of attention to the kindergarten trends, and I did a graph, which I'll share with my colleagues. And we have a few extras. Oops. And this shows both kindergarten and first grade. As most people know, kindergarten's kind of a tough group because there's now kindergarten, there's TK, there's springboard, there's young fives. And on top of that, we went through the transition for 3 years when we were only enrolling 11 months worth of students instead of 12. And so as the date for kindergarten got pushed back, so it was actually pretty hard to interpret the kindergarten numbers. A number of people have done adjustments for that. I was one of them. And the way you see here is the adjusted number in the blue. And then, but to make it simple, I just also did the first grade number because there are no adjustments on the first grade number. And you can see the kindergarten number lagged by 1 year predicts the first grade number pretty reliably. And you can see the trend has been steadily downward since 2011. And you can predict with reasonable high degree of certainty that though first grade was up this year, it will almost certainly be down next year since kindergarten is sharply down from the year prior. So I wanted to point out that it looks like the trend that we have been experiencing is likely to continue of smaller kindergarten classes, though that trend could change at any time. I think that's the one thing we learned in the EMAC was there is no certainty in demographic forecasting. The demographers call that permanent employment. And especially with the uncertainty around the housing development market in Palo Alto, it is virtually certain that we have no idea what this trend was going to look like more than a few years in the future. So anyway, I wanted to share this information. I do think right now it confirms our past history is our present, but I don't think that means that it'll necessarily be our future. Can I do one more thing? Yeah. One thing, and I just do this as an observation, it didn't really come out of the report directly. If you compare our class size in elementary to what it was 5 or 10 years ago, it is smaller. I compared it to, I think, the report 5 years ago, and on average, it is 1 full student smaller in elementary than it was 5 years ago. And, that I don't think that's an especially intentional thing. I think it's largely driven by the fact that enrollment has been shrinking in the kindergartens and in the elementaries, and that it's hard to combine classes and it's hard to figure out how to shrink the thing. But we have essentially been investing more in elementary staffing than we have in the past. And at a time when there is a lot of pressure on what we call the bubble classes now in the high schools. And so I don't think that was necessarily the intent of the board. In fact, we've actively tried to add teachers to the high school staffing quadrant to keep enrollment down there. But what's happened is that elementary class size has gone down and will continue to go down. Our kindergartens are exceptionally small, partly as a result of the negotiated agreement regarding full-day kindergarten. And one thing we found is that when you go to 19, unless you're willing to combine classes later, you're going to end up with slightly smaller classes all the way through. And I think we'll probably see our elementary classes continue to shrink over the next few years unless we do something to change it. So I don't have any recommendation or even, that's only an observation. But I think it's something we should be aware of because we're essentially investing in elementary class reduction, whether we know it or not. Thank you for your indulgence of the time.
Is there any, why don't we take up Mr. Collins' motion now about quadrants unless it seems like it's going to be a controversial one.
Second.
I seconded already.
Oh.
So it's already been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I mean,
I think there's yet another reason to separate them out, which is what I was thinking as I was looking at the data, that if you look at the West Quadrant change in enrollment, it says overall it's a 0% change, but 2 of them have gone down significantly and 2 of them have gone up significantly. So I think conflating those areas, not only are they geographically diverse, but there's very different things happening in those places. So I think it does benefit us to separate them and look at them separately.
Yeah. I'd only ask if staff has any reason to push back. I don't know.
No, actually, we discussed this one, and while there are some things we think maybe are unnecessary, this is not one of them. So we can absolutely accommodate this one.
okay, any further discussion on that? Student board members, preferential vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Board members, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so that motion passes. Ms. Baton-Caswell?
Yeah, I think I'm going to give a little color to some of the reason for some of this stuff. One of the reasons you might not have done this level of analysis in the districts that you have come from is you didn't have to plan your budget per child based on property tax, which is what we have to do. So during the time when we were growing like the dickens, but our property tax, we weren't sure if it was always keeping up with how we were growing. We really had to pay attention to that at every site. And at the same time, as Mr. Collins said, we had to look at whether we needed to open another elementary school, but that decision was very, very tough to make because if we were wrong, we could end up with a cost we couldn't cover. And so it was going to be a very expensive cost, and if we were wrong, that was going to be a pretty major situation. The other thing was we really, really had to pay attention to our overflows. We seem to have done a fabulous job with overflows at this time, but the truth of it, well, other than we have a fabulous person doing the work, is we've had some support because less kids are coming in. And when you have more space, it's easier not to have any overflows, or very few. So I wouldn't get rid of this because with the city building a lot of new housing based on the push they're getting from the state, and with Stanford planning for a lot of new housing, this could very easily become an issue that we have to deal with again. So having the history on it helps us look at when we've made mistakes and when we haven't. Certainly separating out the West Quadrant into 2 will help us think about where we want to overflow people if we have to. I do think at some point, if things continue to shrink, let's say this doesn't happen, and we actually, because we're really fighting demographics for the whole country, and the demographics for the whole country is that actually the number of school-age kids is shrinking. However, it is growing in certain parts of the West and South, and with these pressures coming in from the state for us to put more housing in, it's unclear what the future is going to hold for us. So we do have to pay attention to that. We also need to think if that doesn't happen, if the housing doesn't materialize, what does that mean for how many schools we have? And we need to be able to look at that. I think the out-of-district number also includes transfers from other districts that are not staff. Do you have any idea how many of those there are?
Oh, about 10.
Oh, it's about 10? It's that small?
I'm getting a prompt.
That
from our
includes
audience.
Los Altos, transfers over from Los Altos? Okay, so Los Altos, where's the Los Altos kids? Where'd they show up in this?
So, Ms. Best, why don't you come up so that folks who aren't here can hear your
Oh, yeah.
answers, because I think this might be of interest.
Yeah, the Los Altos ones are in the out-of-district, so.
So then the out-of-district number of 10
includes
coming in
them.
from out-of-district that aren't staff members' kids? There's another.
Correct. There's about 230 employee kids and another, excuse me, I'm giving you numbers across the district, not at elementary.
Okay,
So,
that's fine.
Around 230 employee children and about 40 of the Gardner-Bullis interdistrict.
So coming in from Los Altos through
Yeah.
our,
And then there's about 10 from other districts.
for other reasons?
For other reasons.
Okay, that would be good to keep track of. And obviously you are keeping track of that, but for us to see it. The class size by course, those tables, those came in later. Those haven't been here since the 60s. They were really so that we could look at class size. It was since 2015, right? Third year. Okay, so 2016. And then we've been looking at that. One way that we got this information was in Excel spreadsheets so that we could sort and make our own graphs and take a look at what this looked like. I think that's helpful if we're trying to decide on investment decisions around class size. When we get information in PDF form, unless we retype it all into our own table, we can't do that. And since it must exist somewhere in an Excel spreadsheet in order to make a PDF, I think that's helpful for the board to have. We are going to be having discussions about investment.
Yeah, and I think also community members have used that as the basis for doing some really useful work, so I think that makes good sense.
And this is how this originally came to us. A community member made a table based on their own information. It wasn't correct, or it was not entirely correct because they didn't have enough information. And then staff created some tables that actually had the actual numbers. So I would like to make a motion that we get this information, the last table, the class size tables, in Excel tables rather than PDF going forward.
I can help if you'd like to save the time of a vote. We have those. We got those today, and I can get those to everybody.
That'd be great. Could you also post them with the, on board docs? To Mr. Dauber's point.
I think we may have already done that, but yes, we can absolutely do that.
Oh, wow, it's like ESP.
We're that good.
Okay, so that's sort of the history behind this, is it has a lot to do with managing our numbers across the district, particularly in high enrollment times.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Brianza?
I don't have a lot to add. I think they said most of it. I do think that the community has a big interest in seeing these trends. So those first charts that talk about enrollment at schools and what's gone up over the years and down over the years, our community is interested in that and like to know that. So I love that this is here as an informational piece. It's not a presentation to us, but now it's in a board doc. It's out there. If anyone asks us, we can point to them to board docs to just see it. And as for the enrollment by course, I think that the meat there is how many classes have more than 32 students in them. So if you wanted to instead, or in addition, whatnot, just run it by sort of an outlier, how many classes are not really where we're trying to be, to give us an idea. I mean, I think that's sufficient. Others might disagree with me and want to see it all. But I think that's why when we're looking at all this data, that's really what I think the reason this was added in was how many classes are above 32 and how big are they? And maybe on the low end too, to know how many classes we're running that are really small. But I think that there's less concern over that on the low end. But that's it.
I agree with all that. I think the class sizes by course is really important for transparency and also for assessing how the district is doing against our goals around class sizes, particularly in the high schools. So I think it's really useful information. Thank you for providing it. Any other? Oh, I apologize.
You said what I was going to say anyway. The only other observation I had was the hospital school enrollment has dropped a lot. Is that as good a news? I mean, that seems like good news. We don't want kids at the hospital. Why is it that the case? Is because of the construction? Uh-oh.
It's simply a discrepancy in how we were reporting data in the past.
Oh, I was hoping that we had fewer sick kids.
No. I can go into an explanation, but no.
No, that's all right.
It's
That's right.
Well, yeah, I think there's a lot more level of detail to that, and it's very complicated because kids can only be entered into one school district at a time in the state of California.
And that's been the case for the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, but the way it was being reported, we unearthed in part of our exploration and cleanup was needing some change in protocol and practice.
So,
Okay.
Yeah, this is board update worthy. There's some real complexities to what they're skirting around
Yeah, I mean,
right now.
13% of the drop in enrollment is hospital enrollment, is due to the hospital enrollment drop.
The story's worse than that. So
There's more there.
It's only worse if there's more sick children.
that's absolutely true.
So that might be useful
I
for
look
board
forward
update.
to that update in
Yeah.
a weekly report or some
Yes.
such thing. Probably not for this time.
I have one more question or request, and that is Middle College and Alta Vista are two different animals. And it would be really good to see them separated.
We have separate data on that going back to the 70s. I mean, so please don't combine.
Yeah, and even just the fact that there's such a demand now for Middle College and.
Right, we have an MOU, and there's a maximum number of students, and we fill it every time,
So then we should just report it out separately so that people understand that.
Okay, so I apologize for jumping ahead of you. Mr. Prabhakar?
Yeah, I guess I think it'd be good to share this data with students. I know like some of my peers have specifically pointed out large class sizes in upper lane, upper grade math. I guess the data does seem to match that at Gunn for analysis honors, and also biology, which the data does seem to match as well. So I guess students being able to see this and compare that to the perception of how big certain classes are would be useful for them.
Ms. Furrier?
He said exactly what I was thinking, so.
They're in sync over there.
Great, okay. Any other questions or comments on this item? If not, Mr. Collins?
I did have one other comment. I sent to Dr. Austin a set of additional kind of more, what do they call them? Technical changes to the tables. Not only the headers, but also there are column percentages and row percentages and some of the things that were on old reports that I think are actually very useful. So I'm hoping you'll implement some of those because I think they make the numbers more useful.
I
Just
will,
checking for
I would second that. I by hand went in, but since I had to do it on a PDF, I went by hand and put my own percentages in. It would be so nice if I didn't have to do that.
So checking for my own understanding, are you talking about the future, or would you like us to go back and redo parts of these?
I don't feel the need to do it because I already did it
Future.
for myself.
I have it in
but-
So the
pencil on
future,
my thing. Yeah.
future, got it. We got it.
But yeah, I guess I do want to emphasize, though, that, I mean, a surprising amount of the value is, for our successors, is documenting the present accurately so that when they try to understand when they're in the future trying to understand how they got where they are, that they're able to look at our data and get a clear picture. Our predecessors all did a good job of that for us. So I think we should carry the torch.
Excellent.
Great, okay, so let's move to item 7B, legal expenses report.
Thank you for the excellent report.
Dr. Novak.
For information purposes, we included, per the board's request, a summary of the budget items that we have for legal expenses, and with the idea that we would show every month's legal expenses incurred by cost. So what you see is the amounts that we've actually received from each one of the attorney firms for items incurred, not necessarily paid. There will always be a lag. You'll see that we're going to be a month or so behind. And the concept is that we'll add an extra column for current budget and original budget. And then the year-to-date amounts spent will be previous months, and we'll just keep carrying that forward as we go through the fiscal year. I'm not providing any additional details. It's simply just a report on monies incurred by vendor, and if anyone has any questions, then I could look that up for you and provide that information for you at a later date.
Okay, any questions or comments? I don't know who's first on
I
this.
think Ms. Godfrey's first.
Ms. Godfrey, yeah.
No, I already asked Dr. Novak to add the extra column, so I'm good.
Mr. Collins?
I don't have a question on the report. I have a question on our management of legal expenses. Do we, I mean, so this report it's September 25th, and this covers July? So we're essentially 2 months in arrears on this report, which is just because I know we get the bills. It takes a while for the bills to come in. So the question is, it's hard to manage an expense that you're looking at in the rearview mirror. What efforts do we make to kind of understand current and control current legal expenses?
So I understand the perception that we're that far in arrears, but really the legal firm's time period, their billing closes at the end of the last month, and then they have a few days, so it takes us time to get the actual
I mean,
invoices.
it is in arrears.
It is
It's not
in arrears.
necessarily our fault.
Yep, exactly.
So the question is, what do we do to, and that's part of the business model of law firms is you get their bill well in arrears, so it's hard to turn them off.
So our internal process is that every legal invoice that we get, it gets routed to the person who actually initiated the.
It's less that, more, how do we, I mean, so the problem is always, oh my God, this bill was huge. The problem is, how do you prevent huge bills from happening in the first place?
I want to jump in here
Yes.
real quick.
Yeah.
It's 10:05, so I'm going to be really blunt. Our internal controls are weak right now. We have too many points of contact. Too many people have I would not necessarily call it authority, but they have the practice of contacting attorneys for short periods of time on the calls. The short period calls are the most expensive. So the general counsel and a firming up of our internal controls combined should do a better job of that. If somebody has a 3-minute question, I would advise, and we're going to work on this, that they wait until they have about 12 minutes of questions and just be more efficient in our calls. And once we get the general counsel in place, I also intend designating only a handful of people with the authority to contact attorneys. We're just not there yet, so I'd say weak controls right now.
Okay.
You could also, what I do at work is, in the statement of work, I just put what the budget is and that I don't expect to pay past the budget. And it makes my vendors much more likely to keep in touch with what their cumulative billing is to me.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I had sent similar in an email to you, and I'm not sure if Mr. Novak was on the email, but I think that's awfully important. We tend to treat lawyers with deference that we don't treat most other contractors, their time and materials, and I remember the days when lawyers used to send us bills that just said services rendered, and there was no itemization at all. So that's changed, and lawyers now, most law firms, I can't speak for ours, but most law firms are used to fixed price billing projects, which was unheard of before, but now is very common. And exactly what Ms. Gottfried says, like, here's my budget, and, if you're gonna blow through it without a change order authorization, I'm not gonna pay. And that helps combat the billing 60 days in arrears problem that often happens, because if they blow through the budget, it's like, hey, thanks for the extra work, I appreciate it. So I hope you think about practices like that, because I think those are good practices.
Okay, any other comments? Ms. Baden-Caswell?
This is very helpful. Thank you. It would be good to do the controls we just talked about, but it's just very helpful for us to see this on a regular basis. I had asked for a summary of 2017-18 against what we actually paid by vendor and what our budget was. I know that, Dr. Austin, you said that you needed some more time to do that. When can I expect that we'll get to see that?
The way, I have a few answers to that.
Okay.
The information is available, we can pull that. The way we interpreted direction from the board during the meeting when we came up with this concept of posting billing was that it would be effective July 1st, 18. So we went with the board's direction. So we have two conflicting requests, I guess is what I'm getting
Oh,
to.
okay, well, I had asked and you had said, oh, we can't have it this meeting, but you'll get it. So that was a surprise to me. So
yeah,
do I need to make a motion and ask for it? So so that we can see how
Well,
we've done over time?
We have there's a couple different ways to get there. As far as the posting on the agenda under information items, unless I'm incorrect in this, we all thought we heard effective July 1st.
I think that's correct.
Monthly and
Yes.
year-to-date.
Yep.
So if you're requesting a separate report of 17, 18 as a whole, we can provide that to the board, but it was not our direction to have that on these agendas under the information items. So
Haven't we seen that? How much we spent in total?
Not against budget, not against what our budget was. That was what I had asked. I'm fine getting it later, and maybe I just ask my colleagues, should I make a motion to ask for this?
I mean, I think this feels to me as if it's something that a board member can ask the superintendent to provide, and I would expect that the superintendent would do that.
yeah, well, we have it.
Yeah, so I don't think a motion is required to get a piece of information like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you did, well, I think if I get it, everyone should have
And you can
access to
circulate
it.
it with the board, yeah.
I thought that's our board policy to
Is
do
your
that, or, I'm sorry, our
just
practice.
to make sure we get you the right information, are you asking for that to be broken out by month?
No,
And in the same?
no, I'm
type,
just
or a
asking
yearly?
for the year
I got it.
by
Okay.
vendor budget, just basically what you have here, but
No problem.
for the
I
year.
get that. No problem.
I have one more question, and that is, it seems like last year, sometimes when we got information, it had the investigations cost, the legal cost had the investigations in it, and sometimes it didn't. So do we have all the are investigations being billed differently?
That may be an issue in past history when we go back in terms of the way that things are coded, because I can tell you that there are 3 different ways that you can code according to the SAC structures, and one of them, legal settlements, can be out. So I'll have to look and see how they're doing it. Going forward, we're being very prescriptive on how we're charging it to the object code. So to be fair, I'm not sure in the past that delineation has been all as important, and it is now that this is being reported to the board.
So when you report out 17, 18, can investigations be in there so that we?
That may be a challenge,
consistent?
and I'll do my best to make sure we're doing apples and apples. We're showing apples and apples.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Brianza?
Thank you. I found this really helpful, and I'm optimistic that as we get more and more months, it will be more and more informative. If we have a bubble month or something, it just might trigger us to wonder, hey, are we still on track? Was this an anomaly, or are we outspending? So I think this is great, and I'm looking forward to every month seeing an update on these totals to see if we're on pace to stay within our budget or not. And I think we'll have a big heads up if we're not, right? If it's getting big too fast. That's it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Ms. Furrier, any comments?
No additional comments?
Mr. Prabhakar?
No.
And I don't have any comments either, thank you. So let's move on to,
I'm just going to ask a question, just because it's not going to be in the minutes now, this request that I made. Should I make it during board operations? I'm just trying to understand how I make sure that we have a record of what I asked for.
so there's a 8B in board operations is an opportunity to review the request for additional information made during the meeting. So I believe that's the the point where we hear from the superintendent that he recorded that, and I think it can show up in the minutes, right?
That would be great.
Okay. Okay, so we're on to board operations. We're 17 minutes from our end time. Shall we try to make
Yes, we should try and make it.
to make it before 10:32? Okay, let's do that. So let's begin with reports from board members. Ms. Godfrey.
I have nothing to report.
Mr. Collins.
You should all have a copy of the report on the City School Liaison Committee meeting, which you can read. The only couple of things I'll point out is we did get a large earful about solar panel projects from members of the Park Commission. And they specifically requested, and we agreed to pass on the request, that there be a liaison from the district appointed to the Parks Commission. Not that they would expect that person to attend all the meetings, but that they had a point of contact when things came up that mutually impacted school and city park facilities. I think they probably had the idea that that person would be a board member, though in thinking about it, I thought it could probably more effectively be a staff member. But it's really just appointing a point of contact they can have on their list, and when something comes up, they know who to call and to say, oh yeah, you're the liaison person. That seemed like a good idea, so I passed it along. The other thing is that starting at the next meeting, Dr. Austin, I believe, is going to be attending the city school meetings. It appears at this point that Deputy City Manager Rob DeGois is going to be attending for the city, though I think the city manager may come to the first one when we do it in October. So we'll see how that goes. Do you have anything to add to that? You don't have to.
No, a couple quick things. I think the city schools liaison committee can do better work than we have. I think it can be really powerful if we have the right people there with a tight agenda, and I think that that's one of the things that we've talked about is our weighing in on that. I did happen to see soccer and spent time on the soccer fields at JLS over the weekend, and while I understand some of their frustration, I also noticed a large number of parents and kids under the solar arrays during the games. It was not all bad. So that's it.
Ms. Baton-Caswell.
I have a couple of things. Couple of things. I'm planning to go to Cal SSD on the 11th, and does anybody want to go with me? Well, if anybody does, I will drive. It's not that bad. We actually get a lot of information we wouldn't normally get by being at those meetings. They're also a good place to ask other districts questions about how they're handling things.
And because of the Brown Act, you can't talk about this stuff. You get to talk about fun stuff in the car.
Right. And I play good music. Anyway, the Santa Clara County School Boards Association, for which I'm the vice president this year, is hosting a dinner, the annual fall dinner. And it's a great place to see your colleagues from other districts in Santa Clara County. There's also going to be a very dynamic speaker, and it's October 17th. And Dr. Austin, you're invited as well. And I was invited to give an interview skills session, or actually 3 sessions, on October 10th at Gunn. I did this last year, and I had a lot of kids come to me afterwards asking for individual advice on interviewing for colleges. So, feel like coming? Come on down. And my request to the superintendent for the legal bills as I mentioned them.
Mr. Brianza.
I was waiting to be recognized.
Good.
Two quick things. Dr. Austin, in our new structure of our agenda, which we worked hard on in agenda setting, I think I know the difference here, but at the beginning you had reports and at the end you have information. And it seems like the reports has a presentation and the information doesn't, but they seem to kind of go together. There are these things that we're not taking action on, but things that we want to include. So was reports just early because we had two outside presenters, and will those otherwise be together, or will they always go in that order? Can you just clarify that?
I think the best part about the agenda is it's whatever we want it to be. So tonight we had an attorney as part of that. We didn't want to pay the attorney to watch our meeting. And it made sense to have Mr. Golden's report there in the beginning, but we can play with this. It can land several places. Some places call that special reports, so there's still some work to be done there.
Okay, I liked it though. I like the structure. And the other thing, I think this would be the place during operations to bring it up, but because we're trying to schedule several special meetings for various reasons, and we've been having some trouble because we're all very busy people. Last year, I believe Ms. Godfrey requested at some point in the year that we set aside the first Thursday after the first Tuesday night board meeting, just lock it into our calendars. And maybe that's not the right time, but I wonder if we wouldn't benefit from locking in one additional time per month. And if we don't need it, we don't need it. But if we do, at least it'll be easier to schedule. So I would like to propose us revisiting that in some way.
Okay.
I didn't realize we were supposed to, that this was the time to talk to the agenda. The one observation I had on the agenda structure was prior we had placed a high priority on having open forum at a time certain. And I'm sure the agenda committee was aware of this and took it into consideration. And this particular time it was later. I don't know how often that would actually happen, but it was something that we put a high priority on in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important. I remember the days when it was sometime between 8 and 10.
6:45 and 10:45.
So it was pretty
We
awful.
did that specially for you.
Yeah, I know. I had a sneaking suspicion that that was the case. So I think we should really put a priority on keeping it early. And so in this case, you know, I think we had this special exception because we did have an attorney that we didn't want to pay. But I think in general, it's good feedback to take because I think that's an important
To be
value.
able to tell the community, which is, I think what I've been telling people, is like 6:45, 7 o'clock, if you're there, you can talk.
Yeah, I think that makes good sense. So let's see, I attended the CAC picnic that Dr. Austin mentioned, which I really appreciated. And I also attended the CAC monthly meeting. And Ms. Ellis gave a really useful presentation about the special education sort of organization, which I learned a lot from, actually, and I think the attendees really appreciated. So those were both really great events. And I don't have anything else. Dr. Austin, I think there was a question that we were going to come back to about the letter, the two different versions of the letter and so on. Do you want to speak to that?
No, not really. Here's why. I confused a question from Ms. Baton-Caswell with an existing item, and my response was really to a question that she did not ask. So although the two things are very related, it's not apples and apples, and I just realized that trying to piece this together. So it's going to take way too many words for this situation to make any sense, so let me just work on it in an update, and I'll get it back to everybody.
I think just an update, since we had some questions from the community, an update that the community can see would be helpful.
Absolutely, I can do that this week.
Student board members, do you want to give us any updates, since you're still here, which is really nice?
Well, I guess I briefly mentioned this during my report at the beginning, but SEC, which is Gun Student Government, is currently doing something called impact projects. where we choose something that we find in campus and we try to improve it, whether it's like trying to get more students involved. So if anyone has like any unique ideas that you think would benefit the students, we'd be happy to like look into those and try to take those on since we're looking for more ideas.
Mine's kind of like a general report, but there's been like a huge focus recently in ASB, and I talked to Ms. Baton-Caswell about it, about trying to solve the vaping in the bathrooms at Pally, because it's just become such a huge problem. And so Ms. Jordan's point, I think, was great, that we should consider somehow addressing that at a district level. Yeah, so it's pretty common. It's like a nationwide thing, but I think that should be considered.
Okay, we just have a few more minutes to get to 10:32.
You could let us out early.
This meeting is adjourned.
How come, oh yeah.